The Muqaddimah Chapter 3 Part 4. The functions of the religious institution of the Caliphate. It 357 has become clear that to be caliph in reality means acting as substitute for the lawgiver, Muhammad, with regard to the preservation of the religion and the political leadership of the world. 358 The lawgiver was concerned with both things. With religion in his capacity as the person commanded to transmit the duties imposed by the religious laws to the people and to cause them to act in accordance with them, and with worldly political leadership in his capacity as the person in charge of the public interests of human civilization. We have mentioned before that civilization is necessary to human beings and that care for the public interests connected with it is likewise something necessary. If mankind is not to perish of neglect. 359 We have also mentioned before that royal authority and its impetus suffice to create the institutions serving the public interest. 360 Although they would be more perfect if they were established through religious laws. Because the religious law has a better understanding of the public interests. Royal authority, if it be Muslim, falls under the caliphate and is one of its concomitants. The royal authority of a non-Muslim nation stands alone. But in any case, it has its subordinate ranks and dependent positions which relate to particular functions. The people of the dynasty are given particular positions, and each one of them discharges the duties of his position as directed by the ruler who controls them all. Thus, the power of the ruler fully materializes, and he is well able to discharge his governmental duties. Even though the institution of the caliphate includes royal authority in the sense mentioned, its religious character brings with it special functions and ranks peculiar to the Muslim caliphs. We are going to mention the religious functions peculiar to the caliphate, and we shall come back later on to the functions of royal government. 361. It should be known that all the religious functions of the religious law, such as prayer, the office of judge, the office of mufti, the holy war, and market supervision, hisbah, fall under the great imamate. 362 Which is the caliphate? The caliphate is a kind of great mainspring and comprehensive basis, and all these functions are branches of it and fall under it because of the wide scope of the caliphate, its active interest in all conditions of the Muslim community, both religious and worldly, and its general power to execute the religious laws relative to both religious and worldly affairs. The leadership of prayer is the highest of all these functions and higher than royal authority as such, which, like prayer, falls under the caliphate. This is attested by the circumstance that the men around Muhammad deduced from the fact that Abu Bakr had been appointed Muhammad's representative as prayer leader, the fact that he had also been appointed his representative in political leadership. They said, "The messenger of God found him acceptable for our religion. So, why should we not accept him for our worldly affairs?" 363 If prayer did not rank higher than political leadership, the analogical reasoning would not have been sound. If this is established, it should be known that city mosques are of two kinds, great spacious ones which are prepared for holiday 364 prayers, and other, minor ones which are restricted to one section of the population or one quarter of the city and which are not for the generally attended prayers. Care of the great mosques rests with the caliph or with those authorities, wazirs, or judges, to whom he delegates it. A prayer leader for each mosque is appointed for the 5 daily prayers, the Friday service, the 2 festivals, the eclipses of the sun and the moon, and the prayer for rain. This arrangement is obligatory only in the sense that it is preferable and better. It also serves the purpose of preventing the subjects from usurping one of the duties of the caliphs connected with the supervision of the general, public interests. The arrangement is considered necessary by those who consider the Friday service necessary, and who, therefore, consider it necessary to have a prayer leader appointed. Administration of the mosques that are restricted to one section of the population or to one quarter of the city rests with those who live nearby. These mosques do not require the supervision of a caliph or ruler. The laws and conditions governing the office of prayer leader, and the person entrusted with it are known from the law books. They are well explained in the books on administration, Al-Aim as-Sultaniyat, by Al-Mawardi 365 and other authors. We shall not, therefore, mention them at any length. The first caliphs did not delegate the leadership of prayer. The fact that certain of the caliphs were stabbed in the mosque during the call to prayer, being expected, by the assassins to be there, at the prayer times, shows that the caliphs personally led the prayer and were not represented by others. This custom was continued by the Umayyads later on. They considered it their exclusive privilege and a high office to lead the prayer. The story goes that Abd al-Malik said to his doorkeeper, Hajib, I have given you the office of keeper of my door, and you are entitled to turn away anyone, save these three persons, the person in charge of food, because it might spoil if kept back, the person in charge of the call to prayer, because he calls the people to God, and the person in charge of the mails, because delaying the mail might mean the ruin of the remote provinces. 366. Later, when the nature of royal authority, with its qualities of harshness and unequal treatment of the people in their religious and worldly affairs, made itself felt, the rulers chose men to represent them as prayer leaders. They reserved for themselves the leadership of prayer at certain times and on general, festive, occasions, such as the 2 holidays and the Friday service. This was for purposes of display and ostentation. Many of the Abbasid and Ubaidid, Fatimid, caliphs, did this at the beginning of their respective dynasties. The office of Mufti. As to the office of Mufti, the caliph must examine the religious scholars and teachers and entrust it only to those who are qualified for it. He must help them in their task, and he must prevent those who are not qualified for the office from becoming muftis. The office of Mufti is one of the public interests of the Muslim religious community. The caliph has to take care, lest unqualified persons undertake to act as Mufti, and so lead the people astray. Teachers have the task of teaching and spreading religious knowledge and of holding classes for that purpose in the mosques. If the mosque is one of the great mosques under the administration of the ruler, where the ruler looks after the prayer leaders, as mentioned before, teachers must ask the ruler for permission to teach there. If it is one of the general mosques, no permission is needed. However, teachers and muftis must have some restraining influence in themselves that tells them not to undertake something for which they are not qualified, so that they may not lead astray those who ask for the right way or cause to stumble those who want to be guided. A tradition says, those of you who most boldly approach the task of giving fatwas are most directly heading toward hell. 367. The ruler, therefore, has supervision over muftis and teachers, and can give, or deny, them permission to exercise their functions, as may be required by the public interest. The office of judge. The office of judge is one of the positions that come under the caliphate. It is an institution that serves the purpose of settling suits and breaking off disputes and dissensions. It proceeds, however, along the lines of the religious laws laid down by the Quran and the Sunnah. Therefore, it is one of the positions that belongs to the caliphate and falls under it generally. At the beginning of Islam, the caliphs exercised the office of judge personally. They did not permit anyone else to function as judge in any matter. The first caliph to charge someone else with exercise of the office of judge was Umar. He appointed Abu Darda 368 to be judge with him in Medina. He appointed Shurayh as judge in al-Basra, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari as judge in al-Kufa. On appointing Abu Musa, he wrote him the famous letter that contains all the laws that govern the office of judge, and is the basis of them. He says in it, 369. Now, the office of judge is a definite religious duty and a generally followed practice. Understand the depositions that are made before you, for it is useless to consider a plea that is not valid. Consider all the people equal before you in your court and in your attention, so that the noble will not expect you to be partial and the humble will not despair of justice from you. The claimant must produce evidence. From the defendant, an oath may be exacted. Compromise is permissible among Muslims, but not any agreement through which something forbidden would be permitted, or something permitted forbidden. If you gave judgment yesterday, and today upon reconsideration come to the correct opinion, you should not feel prevented by your first judgment from retracting, for justice is primeval, and it is better to retract than to persist in worthlessness. Use your brain about matters that perplex you and to which neither Quran nor Sunnah seem to apply. Study similar cases and evaluate the situation through analogy with those similar cases. If a person brings a claim, which he may or may not be able to prove, set a time limit for him. If he brings proof within the time limit, you should allow his claim, otherwise you are permitted to give judgment against him. This is the better way to forestall or clear up any possible doubt. All Muslims are acceptable as witnesses against each other, except such as have received a punishment 370 provided for by the religious law, such as are proved to have given false witness, and such as are suspected, of partiality, on the ground of client status or relationship, for God, praised be He, forgives because of oaths. 371 and postpones punishment, in face of the evidence. Avoid fatigue and weariness and annoyance at the litigants. For establishing justice in the courts of justice, God will grant you a rich reward and give you a good reputation. Farewell. End of Omar's letter. Although the personal exercise of the office of judge was to have been the task of the caliphs, they entrusted others with it because they were too busy with general politics and too occupied with the holy war, conquests, defense of the border regions, and protection of the center. These were things which could not be undertaken by anyone else because of their great importance. They considered it an easy matter to act as judge in litigation among the people and, therefore, had themselves represented by others in the exercise of the office of judge, so as to lighten their own burden. Still, they always entrusted the office only to people who shared in their group feeling either through common descent or their status as clients. They did not entrust it to men who were not close to them in this sense. The laws and conditions that govern the institution of the judiciary are known from works on jurisprudence and, especially, from books on administration, al-A'imma Sultaniyat. In the period of the caliphs, the duty of the judge was merely to settle suits between litigants. Gradually, later on, other matters were referred to them more and more often as the preoccupation of the caliphs and rulers with high policy grew. Finally, the office of judge came to include, in addition to the settling of suits, certain general concerns of the Muslims, such as supervision of the property of insane persons, orphans, bankrupts, and incompetents who are under the care of guardians, supervision of wills and mortmain donations and of the marrying of marriageable women without guardians, wall. To give them away 372 according to the opinion of some authorities, supervision of public roads and buildings, examination of witnesses, attorneys, and court substitutes, 373 to acquire complete knowledge and full acquaintance relative to their reliability or unreliability. All these things have become part of the position and duties of a judge. Former caliphs had entrusted the judge with the supervision of torts 374. This is a position that combines elements both of government power and judicial discretion. It needs a strong hand and much authority to subdue the evildoer and restrain the aggressor among two litigants. In a way, it serves to do what the judges and others are unable to do. It is concerned with the examination of evidence, with punishments not foreseen by the religious law, with the use of indirect and circumstantial evidence, with the postponement of judgment until the legal situation has been clarified, with attempts to bring about reconciliation between litigants, and with the swearing in of witnesses. This is a wider field than that with which the judges are concerned. The first caliphs exercised that function personally until the days of the Abbasid al-Mu'tadi. Often, they also delegated it to their judges. All, 375 for instance, delegated torts, to his judge, Abu Idris al-Khalani, 376 al-Mamun to Yahya b. Anitham, 377 and Al-Mutasim to Ibn Abi Idu ID 378. They also often entrusted the judges with leadership of the Holy War in summer campaigns. Yahi Ib. Anitham thus went on a summer campaign against the Byzantines in the days of Al-Ma'mun. The same was done by Mundhir b. Said, 379 judge under the Spanish Umayyad Abdar Rahman and Nasir. Making appointments to these functions was the task of the caliphs or of those to whom they entrusted it, such as a minister to whom full powers were delegated, or a ruler who had gained superiority. The police. In the Abbasid dynasty and in the dynasties of the Umayyads in Spain and under the Ubaydid, Fatimids, in Egypt and the Maghrib, the control of crimes and imposition of punishments required by the religious law was also a special task, and was delegated to the chief of police, Sahib Ashurta. 380. The police is another religious function that under these dynasties belonged to the positions connected with the religious law. Its field is somewhat wider than that of the office of judge. It makes it possible for suspects to be brought into court. It decides upon preventive punishments before crimes have been committed. It imposes the punishments required by the religious law where they are due, and determines compensation in cases of bodily injury where the law of talion applies. It imposes punishments not provided for by the religious law, and provides for corrective measures against those who did not execute the crimes they planned. The proper functions of the police and of torts were forgotten during the dynasties in which the nature of the caliphate was no longer remembered. Torts were transferred to the ruler whether he had been delegated by the caliph to take care of them or not. The police function was split into two parts. One of them was that of taking care of suspects, imposing the punishments required by the religious law, and amputating criminals condemned for crimes punished by the amputation of a limb, and seeing to it that the laws of talion were applied where appropriate. For these duties, the dynasties appointed an official who exercised his office in the service of the political establishment, without reference to the religious laws. That official was sometimes called wal, governor, and sometimes shurta, police. The remaining, former police functions dealt with punishments not provided for by the religious law and the imposition of punishments for crimes fixed by the religious law. They were combined with the functions of judge previously mentioned. They became part of the official duties of the office of judge, and have so remained down to this time. This position was taken away from the people who shared in the group feeling of the dynasty. When there was a religious caliphate, the caliph entrusted the function, since it was a religious office, only to Arabs or to clients' allies, slaves, or followers who shared in their group feeling and upon whose ability and competence to execute the tasks they could rely. When the character and appearance of the caliphate changed and royal and government authority took over, the religious functions lost to some degree their connection with the powers in control, inasmuch as they did not belong among the titles and honors of royal authority. The Arabs later on lost all control of the government. Royal authority fell to Turkish and Berber nations. These caliphal functions, as far as their character and the group feeling that belonged to them was concerned, were even more remote from them than from their predecessors. This was because the Arabs had been of the opinion that the religious law was their religion and that the Prophet was one of them and that his religious laws distinguished them in their thought and action from the other nations. The known Arabs did not think that way. If they had some respect for these functions, it was merely because they had become Muslims. Therefore, they came to entrust them to men outside their own group who had become familiar with these functions, in the dynasties of former caliphs. Under the influence of the luxury of the dynasties to which they had been accustomed for hundreds of years, these people had forgotten the old desert period and desert toughness. They had acquired the habits of sedentary culture, luxurious customs, tranquility, and lack of ability to take care of themselves. In the kingdoms that succeeded the rule of the caliphs, the functions of the caliphate became the prerogative of this kind of urban weakling. They were no longer exercised by people of prestige, but by persons whose qualifications were limited, both by their descent, which was different from that of the men in power, and by the habits of sedentary culture to which they had become accustomed. They were despised as sedentary people are, who live submerged in luxury and tranquility, who have no connection with the group feeling of the ruler, and who depend on being protected by others. Their position in the dynasty derives from the fact that the dynasty takes care of the Muslim religious community and follows the religious laws, and that these persons know the laws and can interpret them through legal decisions, fatwa. They have no standing in the dynasty because they are honored as personalities. Their standing merely reflects an affectation of respect for their position in the royal councils, where it is desired to make a show of reverence for the religious ranks. They do not have executive authority to make decisions in these councils. If they participate in the making of decisions, it is just as a matter of form, with no reality behind it. Executive authority in reality belongs to those who have the power to enforce their decisions. Those who do not have the power to enforce their decisions have no executive authority. They are merely used as authorities on religious law, and their legal decisions, fatwa, are accepted. This is indeed the fact. God gives success. Some scholars think that this is not right, and that rulers who keep jurists and judges out of their councils act wrongly, since Muhammad said, "The scholars are the heirs of the prophets." 381. However, it should be known that it is not as such scholars thinks. 382. Royal and governmental authority is conditioned by the natural requirements of civilization. Were such not the case, it would have nothing to do with politics. The nature of civilization does not require that jurists and scholars have any share in authority. Advisory and executive authority belongs only to the person who controls the group feeling and is by it enabled to exercise authority, to do things or not do them. Those who do not have group feeling, who have no control over their own affairs, and who cannot protect themselves, are dependent upon others. How, then, could they participate in councils, and why should their advice be taken into consideration? Their advice as derived from their knowledge of the religious laws, is taken into consideration, only in so far as they are consulted for legal decisions, fatwa. Advice on political matters is not their province, because they have no group feeling and do not know the conditions and laws which govern group feeling. To pay honor to jurists and scholars is an act of kindness on the part of rulers and emirs. It testifies to their high regard for Islam and to their respect for men who are in any way concerned with it. To understand Muhammad's statement, "The scholars are the heirs of the prophets," it should be realized that the jurists of this time and of the recent past have represented the religious law mainly by ruling on ritual practices and questions of mutual dealings among Muslims. They make such rulings for those who need them to be able to act in accordance with them. This has been the goal of, even, the greatest among them. They are identified with the religious law only to a limited extent, and are known to be experts in it only under certain conditions. The early Muslims, as well as pious and austere Muslims, on the other hand, represented the religious law in all its aspects, and were identified with all of it and known to have had a thorough, practical knowledge of its ways. People who represent the religious law without recourse to the process of transmission may be called heirs. Such, for instance, were the men mentioned in Al-Kashari's Risala 383. People who combine the two things. 384 are religious scholars, the real heirs, such as the jurists among the men of the second generation, the ancient Muslims, and the four Imams. 385, as well as those who took them as models and followed in their steps. In the case of a Muslim who has only one of the two things, the better claim to be called an heir goes to a pious person rather than to a jurist who is not pious. The pious man has inherited a quality. The jurist who is not pious, on the other hand, has not inherited anything. He merely makes rulings for us as to how to act. This applies to the majority of contemporary jurists. 386 except those who believe and do good, and they are few. 387. The position of official witness, Adala, 388. The position of official witness is a religious position depending on the office of judge and connected with court practice. The men who hold it give testimony with the judge's permission for or against people's claims. They serve as witnesses when testimony is to be taken, testify during a lawsuit, and fill in the registers which record the rights, possessions, and debts of people and other legal transactions. This is the significance of the position. We 389 have mentioned the judge's permission because people may have become confused, and, then, only the judge knows who is reliable and who not. Thus, in a way, he gives permission, and he does so only, to those of whose probity he is sure, so that people's affairs and transactions will be properly safeguarded. The prerequisite governing this position is the incumbent's possession of the quality of probity, adala, according to the religious law, his freedom from unreliability. Furthermore, he must be able to fill in the court records and make out contracts in the right form and proper order and correctly, observing the conditions and stipulations governing them from the point of view of the religious law. Thus, he must have such knowledge of jurisprudence as is necessary for the purpose. Because of these conditions and the experience and practice required, the office came to be restricted to persons of probity. Probity came to be considered the particular quality of persons who exercise this function. But this is not so. Probity is one of the prerequisites qualifying them for the office. The judge must examine their conditions and look into their way of life, to make sure that they fulfill the condition of probity. He must not neglect to do so, because it is his duty to safeguard the rights of the people. The responsibility for everything rests with him, and he is accountable for the outcome. Once, official witnesses have been shown clearly to be qualified for the position, they become more generally useful to the judges. They can be used to find out about the reliability of other men whose probity is not known to the judges, because of the large size of cities and the confused conditions of city life. It is necessary to know their reliability, because it is necessary for judges to settle quarrels among litigants with the help of reliable evidence. In assessing the reliability of the evidence, they usually count upon these professional witnesses. In every city, they have their own shops and benches where they always sit, so that people who have transactions to make can engage them to function as witnesses and register the testimony in writing. The term probity, adala, thus came to be used both for the position whose significance has just been explained and for probity, reliability, as required by the religious law, which is used paired with unreliability. The two are the same, but still, they are different. And God knows better. Market Supervision, BISPA, and Mint. The office of Market Supervisor, HISPA, is a religious position. It falls under the religious obligation to command to do good and forbid to do evil, which rests with the person in charge of the affairs of the Muslims. He appoints to the position men whom he considers qualified for it. The obligation thus devolves upon the appointee. He may use other men to help him in his job. He investigates abuses and applies the appropriate punishments and corrective measures. He sees to it that the people act in accord with the public interest in the town, under his supervision. For instance, he prohibits the obstruction of roads. He forbids porters and boatmen to carry too heavy loads. He orders the owners of buildings threatening to collapse, to tear them down and thus remove the possibility of danger to passers-by. He prevents teachers in schools and other places from beating the young pupils too much. 390 His authority is not restricted to cases of quarrels or complaints, but he has to look after and rule on everything of the sort that comes to his knowledge or is reported to him. He has no authority over legal claims in general, but he has authority over everything relating to fraud and deception in connection with food and other things and in connection with weights and measures. Among his duties is that of making dilatory debtors pay what they owe, and similar things that do not require hearing of evidence or a legal verdict, in other words, cases with which a judge would have nothing to do because they are so common and simple. Such cases, therefore, are referred to the person who holds the office of market supervisor to take care of them. The position of market supervisor, consequently, is subordinate to the office of judge. In many Muslim dynasties, such as the dynasties of the Ubaydid, Fatimids, in Egypt and the Maghrib and that of the Umayyads in Spain, the office of market supervisor fell under the general jurisdiction of the judge, who could appoint anyone to the office at discretion. Then, when the position of ruler became separated from the caliphate and when the ruler took general charge of all political matters, the office of market supervisor became one of the royal positions in a separate office. The Mint 391. The office of the Mint is concerned with the coins used by Muslims in commercial transactions, with guarding against possible falsification or substandard quality, clipping, when the number of coins, and not the weight of their metal, is used in transactions, and with all else relating to monetary matters. Further, the office is concerned with putting the ruler's mark upon the coins, thus indicating their good quality and purity. The mark is impressed upon the coins with an iron seal that is especially used for the purpose and that has special designs, legends, on it. It is placed upon the dinar and the dirham after their proper weight has been established, and is then beaten with a hammer until the designs have been impressed upon the coin. This then indicates the good quality of the coin according to the best methods of melting and purification customary among the inhabitants of a particular region under the ruling dynasty. The metal standard is not something rigidly fixed but depends upon independent judgment. Once the inhabitants of a particular part or region have decided upon a standard of purity, they hold to it and call it the guide, imam, or standard, ER. They use it to test their coins. If they are substandard, they are bad. Supervision of all these things is the duty of the holder of the office of the mint. In this respect, it is a religious office and falls under the caliphate. It used to belong to the general jurisdiction of the judge, but now has become a separate office, as is the case with that of market supervision. This is all that is to be said about caliphal positions. There were other positions that disappeared when the things that were their concern disappeared. Further, there are positions that became positions of rulers other than the caliph. Such are the positions of emir and wazir, and those concerned with warfare and taxation. They will be discussed later on in their proper places. The position concerned with prosecution of the Holy War ceased to exist when the Holy War was no longer waged, save in a few dynasties which, as a rule, classify the laws governing it under the governmental, and not the caliphal, authority. Likewise, the office of marshal of the nobility consisting of relatives of the caliphs, whose descent gives them a claim to the caliphate or to an official pension, disappeared when the caliphate ceased. In general, the honors and positions of the caliphate merged with those of royal authority and political leadership. This is the present situation in all dynasties. God governs all affairs in His wisdom. 30. The title of Commander of the Faithful, which is characteristic of the caliph. It was created in the period of the first four caliphs. This is because the men around Muhammad and all the other early Muslims called Abu Bakr, when he received the oath of allegiance, representative, Khalifa, Caliph, of the Messenger of God. This form of address was used until he died. Then, the oath of allegiance was rendered to Umar, who was appointed by Abu Bakr, and people called Umar representative of the Messenger of God. However, they considered the title somewhat cumbersome. It was long and had a succession of genitives. With successive caliphs, that style would become longer and end up as a tongue twister, and the title would no longer be distinct and recognizable because of the great number of dependent genitives. Therefore, they tried to replace the title by some other one appropriate to a caliph. The leaders of military missions used to be called emirs, a formation connected with imara, commandership. Before becoming Muslims, people used to call the Prophet Amir of Mecca and Amir of the Hijaz. The men around Muhammad also used to call Sadb Abi Waqt as commander, Amir, of the Muslims, because he commanded the army at Al-Qadisiyah. The army there, at that time, was the largest agglomeration of Muslims that existed. Now, it so happened that one of the men around Muhammad addressed Umar as commander of the faithful, Amir al-Mu'minin. People liked this form of address, and approved it. Thus, they called Umar by this title. It is said that the first to call him by this title was Abdallah b. Yashar 392. According to others, it was Amr b. Alays and al-Mughira b. Shuba. Again, according to others, it was a messenger. 393 who brought the news of victory from a military mission. He entered Medina and asked for Umar with the words, "Where is the commander of the faithful?" The men around Umar heard this and liked it. They said, "Indeed, you give him the right title. He is truly the commander of the faithful." Thus, they called Umar commander of the faithful, and this became his title among the people. The caliphs who succeeded him inherited the title as a characteristic which no other person shared with them. This was the case with all the Umayyads. The Shia used the title of Imam for Ali, ascribing to him the imamate, which is a related expression for caliphate. They called him Imam, in order to display the novel theory that Ali was more entitled to lead the prayer, Imama, than Abu Bakr. They restricted the title of Imam to Ali, and to those after him whom they considered his successors to the caliphate. All these men were called Imam as long as their propaganda for them was clandestine. But when they eventually seized power, openly, they changed the title of their successors to that of Commander of the Faithful. This was done by the Abbasid Shia. They had always called their leaders Imam down to Ibrahim, for whom they came out into the open and unfurled the banner of war. When Ibrahim died, his brother As-Safa was called Commander of the Faithful. The same was the case with the extremist Shia in Afriqiya. They always called their leaders, who were descendants of Ismail, Imam, until Ubadallah al-Mahdi came to power. They continued to call him, and also his son and successor Abul Qasim, Imam. But when their power was secure, their successors were called Commander of the Faithful. The same was the case with the Idrisids in the Maghrib. They called Idris, and also his son and successor Idris the Younger, Imam. This is Shia procedure. The caliphs inherited the title of Commander of the Faithful from each other. It became a characteristic of the ruler of the Hijaz, Syria, and the Iraq, the regions that were the home of the Arabs and the center of the Muslim dynasty and the base. 394 of Islam and Muslim conquest. Therefore, it was no longer distinctive, when the Abbasid dynasty reached its flowering and prime, and another style of address gained currency, one that served to distinguish them from each other, inasmuch as the title of Commander of the Faithful was one they all had. The Abbasids took surnames such as As-Safa, Al-Mansur, Al-Mahdi, Al-Hadi, Ar-Rashid, and so on, and thus created a sort of cover to guard their proper names against abuse by the tongues of the common people and protect them against profanation. They continued with that custom, down to the end of the dynasty. The Ubaidid, Fatimids, in Afriqiya and Egypt followed their example. The Umayyads refrained from that, for a long time. The earlier Umayyads in the East had done so, in keeping with their austerity and simplicity. Arab manners and aspirations had not yet been abandoned in their time, and the Umayyads had not yet exchanged Bedouin characteristics for those of sedentary culture. The Umayyads in Spain also refrained from such titles, because they followed the tradition of their ancestors. Moreover, they were conscious of their inferior position, since they did not control the caliphate which the Abbasids had appropriated, and had no power over 395 the Hijaz, the base of the Arabs and Islam. and were remote from the seat of the caliphate around which the group feeling, of the Arabs, centered. By being rulers of a remote region, they merely protected themselves against the persecution of the Abbasids. Finally, however, at the beginning of the 4th–10th century, they, Umayyad, Abd Arman the last 396, 3, An-Nasir, b. Muhammad, b. Al-Amir Abdallah b. Muhammad b. Abdar Rahman II, appeared on the scene. It became known how greatly the liberty of the caliphate in the east had been curtailed and how the clients of the Abbasids had taken control of the dynasty and had achieved complete power to depose, replace, kill, or blind the caliphs. Abdar Rahman III, therefore, adopted the ways of the caliphs in the east and in Afriqiya. He had himself called Commander of the Faithful and assumed the surname of An-Nasir li-Din Allah. This custom, which he had been the first to practice, was followed and became an established one. His ancestors and the early Umayyads had not had it. This situation prevailed down to the time when Arab group feeling was completely destroyed and the caliphate lost its identity. Non-Arab clients gained power over the Abbasids, followers, of their own making, gained power over the Ubaydid, Fatimids, in Cairo, the Sinhaja gained power over the realm of Afriqiya, the Zaynida gained power over the Maghrib, and the Reyes de Taifas in Spain gained power over the Umayyads. Each of these groups took over part of the caliphate. The Muslim Empire dissolved. The rulers in the west and the east adopted different titles. Formerly, they had all been called by the name of Sultan. The non-Arab rulers in the east were distinguished by the caliphs with special honorific surnames indicating their subservience and obedience and their good status as officials. Such surnames included Sharaf ad-Dawla, Adud ad-Dawla, Run ad-Dawla, Mu'izz ad-Dawla, Nasir ad-Dawla, Nizam al-Mulk, Ba'i al-Mulk, Dukarat al-Mulk, and so on. 396 of the Ubaydid, Fatimids, used also to distinguish the Sinhaja emirs in that manner. When these men gained control over the caliphs, they were satisfied to keep these surnames and did not adopt caliphal titles out of deference to the institution and in order to avoid any usurpation of its peculiar characteristics. As is customary among those who gain power and control over an existing institution, as we have stated before 397, however, later on, the non-Arabs in the East strengthened their grip on royal authority and became more and more prominent in state and government. The group feeling of the caliphate vanished and dissolved completely. At that time, these non-Arabs were inclined to adopt titles that were characteristic of royal authority, such as An-Nasir and Al-Mansur. This was in addition to the titles they had previously held and which indicated that they were no longer clients and followers through the fact that they were simply combinations with din, religion, such as Salah ad-Din, Asad ad-Din, and Nur ad-Din. 397a. The Reyes de Taifas in Spain, who had a powerful grip on the caliphate, by virtue of the fact that they shared in its tribal group feeling, divided up and distributed among themselves the caliphal titles. They had themselves called An-Nasir, Al-Mansur, Al-Mu'tamid, Al-Muzaffar, and so on. Ibn Sharaf criticized them for this in these verses. What makes me feel humble in Spain is the use of the names Mutasim and Mutated there. Royal surnames not in their proper place. Like a cat that by blowing itself up imitates the lion. 398. The Sinhaj restricted themselves to the display titles that the Ubaydid, Fatimid, caliphs had given them, such as Nasir ad-Dawla, Saif ad-Dawla, 399 and Mu'izz ad-Dawla. They kept to this, even when they exchanged the Ubaydid, Fatimid, propaganda for that of the Abbasids. Later on, as the distance between them and the caliphate grew, they forgot the period of the caliphate. They forgot these titles and restricted themselves to the name of Sultan. The same was the case with the Makrawah rulers in the Maghrib. The only title they adopted was that of Sultan, in accordance with Bedouin custom and desert austerity. At the time when the name of the caliphate had become extinct and its influence non-existent, the Lamtuna, Almoravid, ruler Yusuf b. Tashfin made his appearance among the Berber tribes in the Maghrib. He became the ruler of both shores. He was a good and conservative man who, consequently, in order to comply with all the formalities of his religion, wished to submit to the caliphal authority. He addressed himself to the Abbasid al-Mustajir and sent to him 2 sheikhs from Seville as his ambassadors, Abdallah b. al-Arabi and Abdallah's son, Judge Abu Bakr 400. They were to transmit the oath of allegiance to al-Mustajir, and were to ask him to appoint and invest Ibn Tashfin as ruler over the Maghrib. They returned with the caliphal appointment of Ibn Tashfin as ruler over the Maghrib and with permission to use the caliphal style in dress and flag. In the document, the caliph addressed Ibn Tashfin as commander of the Muslims, 401, in order to honor and distinguish him. Ibn Tashfin, therefore, took that as his title. Others say that he had been called commander of the Muslims before that, out of deference to the high rank of the caliphate, because he and his people, the Almoravids, practiced Islam and followed the Sunnah. The Mahdi, of the Almohads, followed upon the Almoravids. He made propaganda for the truth. He adopted the tenets of the Ash'arites and criticized the Maghribi's for having deviated from them by returning to the ancestral tradition of rejecting allegorical interpretation of explicit statements of the religious law, a rejection that leads to anthropomorphism. 402 as is known from the Ash'arite school. He called his followers Almohads, champions of the strict oneness of God, displaying, by the choice of that name, his disapproval of anthropomorphism. He followed the opinion of the Ulids with regard to the infallible Imam 403 who must exist in every age and whose existence preserves the order of the world. Al-Mahdi was at first called Imam, in accordance with the aforementioned Shia practice with regard to the title of their caliphs. The word al-Masum, infallible, was linked, with Imam, to indicate his tenet concerning the infallibility of the Imam. In the opinion of his followers, he was above the title of Commander of the Faithful. To avoid this title, was in accordance with the tenets of the old Shia, and, he also avoided it, because to use it meant sharing it with the foolish young descendants of the caliphs who were alive in the east and the west at that time. Abd al-Mumin, who was appointed successor to the Mahdi, did adopt the title of Commander of the Faithful. His successors, the caliphs of the Banu Abd al-Mumin, followed his example, and so did their successors, the Hafsids in Afriqiya 404. They appropriated it exclusively as their own, since their sheikh, the Mahdi, had made religious propaganda, justifying the use of that title, and since the power belonged to him and to his friends, clients, who succeeded him and to nobody else, because Qurayshite group feeling had completely ceased to exist. Thus, the use of the title came to be their custom. When governmental authority in the Maghrib lapsed and the Zenata took power, their first rulers continued the ways of desert life and simplicity and followed the Lamtuna, Almoravids, in using the title of Commander of the Muslims, out of deference to the high rank of the Caliphate. They rendered obedience, first to the Caliphate of the Banu Abdul Mumin, and afterwards to that of the Hafsids. The later, Zenata, rulers aspired to the title of Commander of the Faithful, and are using it at this time to comply fully with royal aspirations and the ways and characteristics of royal authority. God has the power to execute his commands. 405. 31. Remarks on the words Pope and Patriarch. In the Christian religion and on the word Kohen used by the Jews. It 406 should be known that after the removal of its prophet, a religious group must have someone to take care of it. Such a person must cause the people to act according to the religious laws. In a way, he stands to them in the place, Khalifa, Caliph, of their prophet, inasmuch as he urges the obligations which the prophet had imposed upon them. Furthermore, in accordance with the aforementioned 407 need for political leadership in social organization, the human species must have a person who will cause them to act in accordance with what is good for them and who will prevent them by force from doing things harmful to them. Such a person is the one who is called ruler. In the Muslim community, the holy war is a religious duty, because of the universalism of the Muslim mission and the obligation to convert everybody to Islam either by persuasion or by force. Therefore, caliphate and royal authority are united in Islam, so that the person in charge can devote the available strength to both of them 408 at the same time. The other religious groups did not have a universal mission, and the holy war was not a religious duty to them, save only for purposes of defense. It has thus come about that the person in charge of religious affairs in other religious groups is not concerned with power politics at all. Among them, royal authority comes to those who have it, by accident and in some way that has nothing to do with religion. It comes to them as the necessary result of group feeling, which by its very nature seeks to obtain royal authority, as we have mentioned before, 409, and not because they are under obligation to gain power over other nations, as is the case with Islam. They are merely required to establish their religion among their own people. This is why the Israelites after Moses and Joshua remained unconcerned with royal authority for about 400 years. 410 Their only concern was to establish their religion. The person from among them who was in charge of their religion was called the Kohen. He was in a way the representative, caliph, of Moses. He regulated the prayers and sacrifices of the Israelites. They made it a condition for the Kohen to be a descendant of Aaron, as it had been destined for him and his children by divine revelation. 4:11 Supervision of the political matters which naturally arise among human beings. The Israelites selected 70 elders who were entrusted with a general legal authority. The Kohen was higher in religious rank than they and more remote from the turbulent legal authority. This continued to be the situation among the Israelites, until the nature of group feeling made itself fully felt and all power became political. The Israelites dispossessed the Canaanites of the land that God had given them as their heritage in Jerusalem and the surrounding region, as it had been explained to them through Moses. The nations of the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Armenians. 412 The Edomites, the Ammonites, and the Moabites fought against them. During that time, political leadership was entrusted to the elders among them. The Israelites remained in that condition for about 400 years. They did not have any royal power and were annoyed by attacks from foreign nations. Therefore, they asked God through Samuel, one of their prophets, that he permit them to make someone king over them. Thus, Saul became their king. He defeated the foreign nations and killed 413 Goliath, the ruler of the Philistines. After Saul, David became king, and then Solomon. His kingdom flourished and extended to the borders of the Hijaz and further to the borders of the Yemen and to the borders of the land of the Romans, Byzantines. After Solomon, the tribes split into two dynasties. This was in accordance with the necessary consequence of group feeling in dynasties, as we have mentioned before. One of the dynasties was that of the 10 tribes in the region of Nablus, the capital of which is Samaria, Sabastiyat, 414, and the other that of the children of Judah and Benjamin in Jerusalem. 415 Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, then deprived them of their royal authority. He first dealt with the 10 tribes in Samaria, Sabastiyat, 416, and then with the children of Judah in Jerusalem. Their royal authority had had an uninterrupted duration of 1,000 years. Now he destroyed their temple, burnt their Torah, and killed their religion. He deported the people to Isfahan 417 and the Iraq. Eventually, one of the Persian Khayanid, Achaemenid, rulers brought them back to Jerusalem, 70 years after they had left it. They rebuilt the temple and re-established their religion in its original form with priests only. The royal authority belonged to the Persians. Alexander and the Greeks then defeated the Persians, and the Jews came under Greek domination. The Greek rule then weakened, and, with the help of their natural group feeling, the Jews rose against the Greeks and made an end to their domination over them. Jewish royal authority was in charge of their Hasmonean priests. The Hasmoneans fought the Greeks. Eventually, their power was destroyed. The Romans defeated them, and the Jews came under Roman domination. The Romans advanced toward Jerusalem, the seat of the children of Herod, relatives by marriage of the Hasmoneans and the last remnant of the Hasmonean dynasty. They laid siege to them for a time, finally conquering Jerusalem by force in an orgy of murder, destruction, and arson. They laid Jerusalem in ruins and exiled the Jews to Rome and the regions beyond. This was the second destruction of the temple. The Jews call it the Great Exile. After that, they had no royal authority, because they had lost their group feeling. They remained afterwards under the domination of the Romans and their successors. Their religious affairs were taken care of by their head, called the Kohen. The Messiah, Jesus, brought the Jews his religion, as is known. He abolished some of the laws of the Torah. He performed marvelous wonders, such as healing the insane 418 and reviving the dead. Many people joined him and believed in him. The largest group among his following were his companions, the apostles. There were 12 of them. He sent some of them as messengers, apostles, to all parts of the world. They made propaganda for his religious group. That was in the days of Augustus, the first of the Roman emperors, and during the time of Herod, the king of the Jews, who had taken away royal authority from the Hasmoneans, his relatives by marriage. The Jews envied Jesus, and declared him a liar. Their king, Herod, wrote to the Roman emperor, Augustus, and incited him against Jesus. The Roman emperor gave the Jews permission to kill him, and the story of Jesus as recited in the Quran occurred 419. The apostles divided into different groups. Most of them went to the country of the Romans and made propaganda for the Christian religion. Peter was the greatest of them. He settled in Rome, the seat of the Roman emperors. They 420 then wrote down the gospel that had been revealed to Jesus, in 4 recensions according to their different traditions. Matthew wrote his gospel in Jerusalem in Hebrew. It was translated into Latin by John, the son of Zebedee, one of the apostles. The apostle, Luke wrote his gospel in Latin for a Roman dignitary. The apostle, John, the son of Zebedee, wrote his gospel in Rome. Peter wrote his gospel in Latin and ascribed it to his pupil Mark. These 4 recensions of the gospel differ from each other. Not all of it is pure revelation, but the Gospels have an admixture of the words of Jesus and of the apostles. Most 421 of their contents consists of sermons and stories. There are very few laws in them. The apostles came together at that time in Rome and laid down the rules of the Christian community. They entrusted them to Clement, a pupil of Peter, noting in them the list of books that are to be accepted and in accordance with which one must act. The books which belong to the old religious law of the Jews are the following: the Torah, which consists of 5 volumes. The Book of Joshua. The Book of Judges. The Book of Ruth. The Book of Judith 422. The 4 Books of Kings. The Book of Chronicles 423. The 3 Books of Maccabees, by Ibn Gorion 424. The Book of Ezra, the religious leader. The Book of Esther 425 and the story of Haman. The Book of Job the righteous. The Psalms of David. The 5 books of David's son, Solomon. The 16 prophecies of the major and minor prophets. The Book of Jesus, the son of Sarah, the minister of Solomon. The books of the religious law of Jesus that was received by the apostles are the following: the 4 recensions of the Gospel. The Book of Paul, which consists of 14 epistles. The Catholica, general epistles, which consist of 7 epistles, the 8th being the Praxis, Acts, stories of the apostles. the Book of Clement, which contains the laws. The Book of the Apocalypse, Revelation, which contains the vision of John, the son of Zebedee. The attitude of the Roman emperors toward Christianity varied. At times, they adopted it and honored its adherents. At other times, they did not recognize it and persecuted its adherents and killed and exiled them. Finally, Constantine appeared and adopted Christianity. From then on, all, the Roman emperors, were Christians. 426. The head of the Christian community, and the person in charge of Christian religious institutions is called Patriarch. He is their religious head and the representative, Caliph, of the Messiah among them. He sends his delegates and representatives to the remote Christian nations. They are called bishop, that is, delegate of the Patriarch. The man who leads the prayers and makes decisions in religious matters is called priest. The person who withdraws from society and retires into solitude for worship is called monk. The latter usually seek solitude in monastic cells. The Apostle Peter, the chief apostle and oldest of the disciples, was in Rome and established the Christian religion there. Nero, the fifth Roman emperor, killed him. 427. Successor to Peter at the Roman see was Arius. Mark the Evangelist spent 7 years in Alexandria and Egypt and the Maghreb making propaganda. After him came Ananias, who was called Patriarch. He was the first patriarch there. He appointed 12 priests to be with him, and it was arranged that when the patriarch died, one of the 12 should take his place, and one of the faithful 428 be elected to take his place as the 12th priest. Thus, the patriarchate fell to the priests. Later on, dissension broke out among the Christians with regard to the basic principles and articles of their religion. They assembled in Nicaea in the days of Constantine, in order to lay down the doctrine of true Christianity. 318 bishops agreed upon one and the same doctrine of Christianity. They wrote it down and called it the Creed. They made it the fundamental principle to which they would all have reference. Among the things they set down in writing was that with respect to the appointment of the Patriarch as the head of Christianity, no reference should be made to the independent judgment of the priests, as Ananias, the disciple of Mark, had prescribed. That point of view was abolished. The Patriarch was to come from a large group and to be elected by the leaders and chiefs of the believers. It has been so ever since. Later on, other dissensions arose concerning the basic principles of Christianity. Synods concerned with regulating the religion were assembled, but there was no dissension with regard to the basic principles of the method of selecting the Patriarch. It has remained the same ever since. The patriarchs always appointed bishops as their delegates. The bishops used to call the Patriarch Father, as a sign of respect. The priests similarly came to call the bishop Father, when he was not together with the Patriarch, as a sign of respect. This caused confusion in the use of the title over a long period, ending, it is said, with the Patriarchate of Hierarchies in Alexandria. It was considered desirable to distinguish the Patriarch from the bishop in the matter of respect, shown to him by style of address. Therefore, the Patriarch was called Pope, that is, Father of Fathers. The name of Pope first appeared in Egypt, according to the theory expressed by Georges B. Alamid 429 in his history. It was then transferred to the occupant of the most important see in Christianity, the See of Rome, which was the see of the Apostle Peter, as we have mentioned before. The title of Pope has remained characteristic of the See of Rome down to this day. Thereafter, there were dissensions among the Christians with regard to their religion and to Christology. They split into groups and sects, which secured the support of the various Christian rulers against each other. At different times there appeared different sections. Finally, these sects crystallized into 3 groups, which constitute the Christian sections. Others have no significance. These are the Melchites, the Jacobites, and the Nestorians. We do not think that we should blacken the pages of this book with discussion of their dogmas of unbelief. In general, they are well known. All of them are unbelief. This is clearly stated in the Noble Quran. To discuss or argue those things with them is not up to us. It is for them to choose between conversion to Islam, payment of the poll tax, or death. Later on, each sect had its own patriarch. The Patriarch of Rome is today called Pope. He is of the Melchite persuasion. Rome belongs to the European Christians. Their royal authority is established in that region. The Patriarch of the Christian subjects 430 in Egypt is of the Jacobite persuasion. He resides among them. The Abyssinians follow the religion of the Egyptian Christians. The Patriarch of Egypt delegates bishops to the Abyssinians, and these bishops arrange religious affairs in Abyssinia. The name of Pope is specially reserved for the Patriarch of Rome at this time. The Jacobites do not call their Patriarch Pope. The word Pope is pronounced Papa. It is the custom of the Pope with respect to the European Christians to urge them to submit to one ruler and have recourse to him in their disagreements and agreements, in order to avoid the dissolution of the whole thing. His purpose is to have the group feeling that is the strongest among them, concentrated upon one ruler, so that this ruler has power over all of them. The ruler is called Emperor, Imperator, with the middle letter 431, pronounced somehow, between DH and Z. The Pope personally places the crown upon the head of the Emperor, in order to let him have the blessing implied in that ceremony. The Emperor, therefore, is called the Crowned One. Perhaps that is the meaning of the word Emperor. This, briefly, is our comment on the two words Pope and Kohen. God leads astray whomever he wants to lead astray, and he guides whomever he wants to guide. 432. 32. The ranks of royal and governmental authority, and the titles that go with those ranks. It 433 should be known that, by himself, the ruler is weak, and he carries a heavy load. He must look for help from his fellow men. He needs their help for the necessities of life and for all his other requirements. How much more, then, does he need it to exercise political leadership over his own species, over the creatures and servants of God whom God entrusted to him as subjects? He must defend and protect the community from its enemies. He must enforce restraining laws among the people, in order to prevent mutual hostility and attacks upon property. This includes improving the safety of the roads. 434. He must cause the people to act in their own best interests, and he must supervise such general matters involving their livelihood and mutual dealings as foodstuffs and weights and measures, in order to prevent cheating. 435. He must look after the mint, in order to protect the currency used by the people in their mutual dealings, against fraud. 436. He must exercise political leadership and get people to submit to him to the degree he desires and be satisfied, both with his intentions regarding them and with the fact that he alone has all the glory and they have none. This requires an extraordinary measure of psychology. 437. A noble sage has said, "Moving mountains from their places is easier for me than to influence people psychologically." 437a. It is better that such help be sought from persons close to the ruler through common descent, common upbringing, or old attachment to the dynasty. This makes such persons and the ruler work together in the same spirit. God said, "Give me my brother Aaron as helper, wazir, from my family. Give me strength through him and let him participate in my business." 438. The person from whom the ruler seeks help may help him with the sword, or with the pen, or with advice and knowledge, or by keeping the people from crowding upon him and diverting him from the supervision of their affairs. The ruler may also entrust the supervision of the whole realm to him and rely upon his competence and ability for the task. Therefore, the help the ruler seeks may be given by one man, or it may be distributed among several individuals. Each of the different instruments through which help may be given has many different subdivisions. The pen has such subdivisions, for instance, as the pen of letters and correspondence, the pen of diplomas 439 and fiefs, and the pen of bookkeeping, which means the offices of Chief of Tax Collections and Allowances and of Minister of the Army. The sword includes such subdivisions, for instance, as the offices of Chief of Military Operations, Chief of Police, Chief of the Postal Service, 440 and Administration of the Border Regions. It should further be known that governmental positions in Islam fell under the Caliphate, because the institution of the Caliphate was both religious and worldly. As we have mentioned before, 441 the religious laws govern all governmental positions, and apply to each one of them in all its aspects. Because the religious law governs all the actions of human beings. Jurists 442 therefore, are concerned with the rank of ruler or sultan and with the conditions under which it is assumed, whether by gaining control over the Caliphate 443, this is what is meant by sultan, 444 or by the caliph delegating power, that is what they mean by wazir, as will be mentioned. They are also concerned with the extent of the ruler's jurisdiction over legal, financial, and other political matters, which may be either absolute or circumscribed. Furthermore, they are concerned with the causes that necessitate the ruler's removal, should such causes present themselves, and with other things connected with the ruler or sultan. Jurists are likewise concerned with all the positions under the ruler and sultan, such as the wazirate, the tax collector's office, and the administrative functions. 445 Jurists must concern themselves with all these things, because, as we have mentioned before, in Islam the Caliphate is an institution of the Muslim religious law, and as such determines the position of the ruler or sultan. However, when we discuss royal and governmental positions, it will be as something required by the nature of civilization and human existence. It will not be under the aspect of particular religious laws. This, one knows, is not our intention in this book. There is no need to go into details with regard to the religious laws governing these positions. The subject is fully treated in the books on administration, Al-Aim as-Sultaniyat, such as the work, of that title, by Judge Abul Hasan al-Mawardi and the works of other distinguished jurists. Those who want to know the details should look them up there. If we discuss the Caliphal positions and treat them individually, it is only in order to make the distinction between them and the governmental, sultan, positions clear, and not in order to make a thorough study of their legal status. This is not the purpose of our book. Thus, we shall discuss those matters only as the necessary result of the nature of civilization in human existence. God gives success. The Wazirate. The Wazirate is the mother of governmental functions and royal ranks. The name itself simply means help. Wizara, Wazirate, is derived either from mu'azara help, or from wizra load, as if the wazir were helping the person whom he supports to carry his burdens and charges. Thus, the meaning comes down to no more than help. 446. We mentioned before, at the beginning of this section, 447 that the conditions and activities of the ruler are restricted to 4 fields. 1. His activities may concern ways and means of protecting the community, such as the supervision of soldiers, armaments, war operations, and other matters concerned with military protection and aggression. The person in charge is the wazir, as the term was customarily used in the old dynasties in the East, and as it is still used at this time in the West. 2. Or, they may concern correspondence with persons far away from the ruler in place or in time, 448 and the execution of orders concerning persons with whom the ruler has no direct contact. The man in charge is the secretary, katib. 3. Or, they may concern matters of tax collection and expenditures, and the safe handling of these things in all their aspects. The man in charge is the chief of tax and financial matters. In the contemporary East, he is called the wazir. 4. Or, they may concern ways to keep petitioners away from the ruler, so that they do not crowd upon him and divert him from his affairs. This task reverts to the doorkeeper, hajib, who guards the door. They, rulers, activities do not extend beyond these 4 fields. Each royal and governmental function belongs to one of them. However, the most important field is the one that requires giving general assistance in connection with everything under the ruler's direct control. This means constant contact with the ruler and participation in all his governmental activities. All the activities that concern some particular group of people or some particular department are of lower rank. Among such activities are the military, leadership of a border region, the administration of some special tax, or the supervision of some particular matter, such as surveillance, hisbah, of foodstuffs, or supervision of the Mint 449. All these activities are concerned with particular conditions. The persons in charge are, therefore, subordinate to those in general supervision, and the latter outrank them. It was this way throughout the whole pre-Islamic period. When Islam appeared on the scene and power was vested in the Caliph, the forms of royal authority no longer existed, and all its functions disappeared, except for some advisory and consultative ones that were natural and continued to exist because they were unavoidable. The Prophet used to ask the men around him for advice and to consult them on both general and special, private, matters. In addition, he discussed other very special affairs with Abu Bakr. Certain Arabs familiar with the situation in the Persian, Byzantine, and Abyssinian dynasties, called Abu Bakr, therefore, Muhammad's wazir. The word wazir was not known, originally, among the Muslims, because the simplicity of Islam had done away with royal ranks. The same relationship, as that between Muhammad and Abu Bakr, existed between Umar and Abu Bakr, and between Ali and Umar, and Uthman and Umar. No specific ranks existed among the early Muslims, in the fields of tax collection, expenditures, and bookkeeping. The Muslims were illiterate Arabs who did not know how to write and keep books. For bookkeeping they employed Jews, Christians, or certain non-Arab clients versed in it. Bookkeeping was little known among them. Their nobles did not know it well, because illiteracy was their distinctive characteristic. Likewise, no specific rank existed among the early Muslims, in the field of official correspondence and the transmission in writing of orders to be executed. They were illiterate, and everyone could be trusted to keep a statement secret and to forward it safely to its destination. Also, there were no political matters that would have required the use of confidential secretaries, because the caliphate was a religious matter and had nothing to do with power politics. Furthermore, secretarial skill had not yet become a craft, its best products or representatives recommended to the caliph. Every individual was capable of explaining what he wanted in the most eloquent manner. The only thing lacking was the technical ability to write. For this, the caliph always appointed someone who knew how to write well, to do such writing as there was occasion for. Keeping petitioners away from the gates of the caliph's court was something that the religious law forbade the caliphs to do, and they did not do it. However, when the caliphate changed to royal authority and when royal forms and titles made their appearance, the first thing the dynasty did was to bar the masses from access to the ruler. The rulers feared that their lives were in danger from attacks by rebels and others, such as had happened to Umar, to Ali, to Muawiyah, to Amr Al-As, and to others. Furthermore, were the people given free access to the ruler, they would crowd upon him and divert him from state affairs. Therefore, the ruler appointed some person to take care of this for him and called him doorkeeper, Utjib. It has already been mentioned that Abd al-Malik said to a doorkeeper whom he was appointing, "I have given you the office of keeper of my door, and you are entitled to turn away anyone, save these 3 persons, the muezzin, because he is the missionary of God, the person in charge of the males. For it, always, is something important that he brings, and the person in charge of food, lest it spoil." 450. Afterwards, royal authority flourished. The official counselor and assistant for tribal and group affairs and good relations, with the various tribes and groups, made his appearance. For him, the name of wazir was used. Bookkeeping remained in the hands of clients, Jews, and Christians. For official documents, a special secretary was appointed, as a precaution against possible publication of the ruler's secrets, something that would be disastrous to his role as political leader. This secretary was not as important as the wazir, because he was needed only for written matters, and not for matters that could be discussed orally. At that time, speech still preserved its old position and was uncorrupted. 451. Therefore, the wazirate was the highest rank throughout the Umayyad dynasty. The wazir had general supervision of all matters delegated to him. 452, and in which he acted in a consultative capacity, as well as all other matters of a defensive or offensive nature. This also entailed the supervision of the ministry, Diwan, of the army. 453, the assignment of military allowances at the beginning of each month, and other matters. Then the Abbasid dynasty made its appearance. Royal authority flourished. The royal ranks were many and high ones. At that time, the position of wazir assumed an added importance. He became the delegate of the caliph, as executive authority. His rank in the dynasty became conspicuous. Everyone looked toward the wazirate and submitted to it. Supervision of the bookkeeping office was entrusted to the wazir, because his function required him to distribute the military allowances. Thus, he had to supervise the collection and distribution of the money, and the supervision of that task was added to his duties. Furthermore, supervision of the pen and official correspondence was entrusted to him, in order to protect the ruler's secrets and to preserve good style, since the language of the great mass had, by that time, become corrupt. A seal was made to be placed upon the documents of the ruler, in order to preserve them from becoming public. That seal was entrusted to the wazir. Thus, the name of wazir came to include the functions of both the sword and the pen, in addition to all the other things for which the wazirate stood, and in addition to its function of giving assistance to the ruler. In the days of Rashid, Jafar b. Yahya was actually called Sultan, an indication of the general extent of his supervising power and control of the dynasty. The only governmental rank that he did not hold was the office of doorkeeper, and he did not hold it because he disdained to accept such an office. Then the Abbasid dynasty entered the period when control over the caliphs. 454 was exercised by others. That control was at times in the hands of the wazir. At other times, it was in the hands of the ruler. When the wazir gained control, it was necessary for him to be appointed the caliph's delegate to comply fully with the religious laws, as mentioned before. 455 At that time, the wazirate was divided into an executive wazirate. This happened when the ruler was in control of his affairs and the wazir executed his decisions, and a delegated wazirate, which happened when the wazir controlled the ruler and the caliph. 456 delegated all the affairs of the caliphate, leaving them to his supervision and independent judgment. This has caused a difference of opinion as to whether two wazirs could be appointed at the same time to the delegated wazirate. The same difference of opinion has existed with regard to the appointment of two imams at the same time, as was mentioned before in connection with the laws governing the caliphate. The ruler continued to be controlled in this way. Non-Arab rulers seized power. The identity of the caliphate was lost. The usurpers were not interested in adopting the caliphal titles, 457, and they disdained to share the same title with the wazirs, because the wazirs were their servants. Therefore, they used the names Amir and Sultan. Those in control of the dynasty were called Amir al-Umara or Sultan, in addition to the ornamental titles which the caliph used to give them. As can be seen in their surnames. 458 They left the name wazir to those who held the office of wazir, in the private retinue of the caliph. So remained the case down to the end of the Abbasid dynasty. In the course of this long period, language had become corrupt. 459 It became a craft practiced by certain people. Thus, it came to occupy an inferior position, and the wazirs were too proud to bother with it. Also, the wazirs were non-Arab, and neither eloquence, nor good style, could be expected of their language. People from other classes were chosen for matters requiring Arabic eloquence and a good style. It was their specialty, and it came to be something that was at the service of, and subordinate to, the wazir. The name Amir was restricted to the men in charge of war operations and the army and related matters, although the Amir had power over the other ranks and exercised control over everything, either as the ruler's delegate or through being in control of the government. This remained the situation. Very recently, the Turkish dynasty has made its appearance in Egypt. The Turkish rulers noticed that the wazirate had lost its identity, because the emirs had been too proud to accept it and had left it to men who were inclined to hold it in the service of the secluded and powerless caliph. The authority of the wazir had become secondary to that of the emir. The wazirate had become a subordinate, ineffectual office. Consequently, the persons who held high rank in the Turkish dynasty, as, for example, the emirs, disdained to use the name of wazir. The person in charge of legal decisions and supervision of the army at the present time, they call deputy, naib. 460 They used the name wazir to designate the person in charge of tax collection. The Umayyads in Spain at first continued to use the name wazir in its original meaning. Later, they subdivided the functions of the wazir into several parts. For each function, they appointed a special wazir. They appointed a wazir to furnish an accounting of government finances, another for official correspondence, another to take care of the needs of those who had suffered wrongs, and another to supervise the situation of people in the border regions. A special house was prepared for all these wazirs. There, they sat upon carpets spread out for them and executed the orders of the ruler, each in the field entrusted to him. One of the wazirs was appointed liaison officer between the wazirs and the caliph. He had a higher position than the others, because he had constant contact with the ruler. His seat was higher than that of the other wazirs. He was distinguished by the title of doorkeeper, hajib. So it continued down to the end of the Umayyad dynasty. The function and rank of hajib took precedence over the other ranks. Eventually, the Reyes de Taifas came to adopt the title. The most important among them at that time was called doorkeeper, hajib, as we shall mention 461. Then, the Shia dynasty, the Ubaidid Fatimids, made its appearance in Afriqiya and Al-Qayrawan. The people who supported it were firmly rooted in desert life. Therefore, they at first neglected such functions and did not use the proper names for them. Eventually, however, the dynasty reached the stage of sedentary culture, and people came to follow the tradition of the two preceding dynasties, the Umayyads and the Abbasids, with regard to the use of titles, as the history of the Ubaidid Fatimid dynasty reveals. When, later on, the Almohad dynasty made its appearance, it at first neglected the matter because of its desert attitude, but eventually it, too, adopted names and titles. The name wazir was used in its original meaning. Later the tradition of the Spanish Umayyad dynasty was followed with regard to government matters, and the name wazir was used for the person who guarded the ruler in his court and saw to it that embassies and visitors to the ruler used the proper forms of greeting and address, and that the requisite manners were observed in his presence. The office of doorkeeper was considered by the later Almohads a much higher one. 462 It has continued to be this way down to the present time. In the Turkish dynasty in the east, the official, who sees to it that people use the proper modes of address and greeting at court and when embassies are presented to the ruler, is called the Dawaydar. 463 His office includes control of the private secretary, Katib as-Sir, and of the postmasters, intelligence agents, who are active in the ruler's interest both far and near. Such is the condition of the Turkish dynasty at this time. God takes charge of affairs. The office of doorkeeper, Hijiba, 464. We have already mentioned 465 that in the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties the title of doorkeeper, Hajib, was restricted to the person who guarded the ruler from the common people and would not give them access to him, or only in such ways, and at such times, as he determined. The office of doorkeeper was lower in rank at that time than the other functions and subordinate to them, because the wazir could intervene whenever he saw fit. This was the situation during the whole Abbasid period, and the situation still persists at this time. In Egypt, the office of doorkeeper is subordinate to the person in charge of the highest function there, who is called deputy, naib. In the Umayyad dynasty in Spain, the office of doorkeeper was that of the person who guarded the ruler from his entourage and from the common people. He was the liaison officer between the ruler and the wazirs and lower officials. In the Umayyad dynasty, the office of doorkeeper was an extremely high position, as Umayyad history shows. Men like Ibn Hudayr 466 and others held the office of doorkeeper in the Umayyad dynasty. Later, when the Umayyad dynasty came under the control of others, the person in control was called doorkeeper, Hajib, because the office of doorkeeper had been such a distinguished one. Al-Manzil b. Abi Amir, as well as his two sons. 467 were Hajibs. After they had openly adopted the external forms of royal authority, they were succeeded by the Reyes de Tafas. The latter, also, did not fail to use the title of Jib. It was considered an honor to possess it. The most powerful of the Reyes de Tafas used the royal style and titles, and then inevitably mentioned the titles Hajib and Dul el-Waziratain, holder of the two wazirates, meaning the wazirates of the sword and the pen. The title of Hajib referred to the office that guarded the ruler from the common people and from his entourage. Dul Waziratain referred to the fact that the holder of the title combined the functions of the sword and the pen. In the dynasties of the Maghrib and Ifriqiya, no mention was made of the title of doorkeeper, on account of their Bedouin attitude. Occasionally, but rarely, it is found in the Ubaydid, Fatimid, dynasty in Egypt. That was at the time when the Ubaydid Fatimids had become powerful and used to sedentary culture. In the Almohad dynasty, which made its appearance, subsequently, sedentary culture, which calls for the use of titles and the separation of government functions with distinctive names, only became firmly established late in the dynasty. The only rank they had at first was that of wazir, which they used for the secretary who participated with the ruler in the administration of his special, private, affairs. Men such as Ibn Atiyah 468 and Abd as-Salam al-Kumi 469 held the position. Such a wazir had, in addition to his main duty, to take care of bookkeeping and all the financial business. Later on, the name of wazir was given to relatives of the Almohad dynasty, such as Ibn Jami 470 and others. The name of doorkeeper, Hajib, was not known at that time in the Almohad dynasty. In the Hafsid dynasty of Ifriqiya, the top position was at first in the hands of a wazir who gave advice and counsel. He was called Sheikh of the Almohads. He had to take care of appointments and dismissals, the leadership of the army, and war operations. Bookkeeping and the ministry, Diwan of tax collection, were another, separate rank. The person in charge of it was called Sahib al-Ashghal, manager of financial affairs. 471 He had complete charge of income and expenditures. He audited the finances, collected payments, and punished defaulters. One condition was that he be an Almohad. The pen was also a separate office under the Almohads. It was only entrusted to a person with good knowledge of official correspondence and who could be trusted with secrets. Since people of consequence in the dynasty had no professional knowledge of writing and the proper use of their language for official correspondence. A particular descent was not a condition of appointment to that office. The royal authority of the Hafsid ruler was very far-flung, and a great number of dependents lived in his house. Therefore, he needed a steward to be in charge of his house. That steward had the duty, properly to apportion and fix the salaries, allowances, garments, kitchen and stable expenditures, and other things. He was in control of the stores, in the treasuries, and had the duty of telling the tax collectors to provide for the quantities and amounts of money needed. He was called doorkeeper, hajib. Occasionally, the function of signing official documents 472 was added to his duties, if he happened to have a good knowledge of writing. However, that function was occasionally given to somebody else. It continued to be this way. The ruler stayed in seclusion, 473, and the doorkeeper, hajib, became the liaison officer between the people and all the officials. In the later years of the dynasty, the offices of the sword and of war operations were added to his duties. At this time it also became his duty to give advice and counsel. Thus, his office became the highest in rank and included all government functions. For some time after the reign of the 12th ruler 474 of the Hafsids, the government was controlled by others, and the ruler kept in seclusion. Afterwards, his grandson Sultan Abul Abbas regained control of his affairs. He removed the vestiges of seclusion and, outside, control by abolishing the office of doorkeeper, hajib, which had been the stepping stone toward control of the government. 475 He handled all his affairs himself without asking anyone else for help. This is the situation at the present time. There is no trace of the title of doorkeeper, hajib, among the Zenata dynasties in the Maghrib, of which the most important is the dynasty of the Marianides. Leadership of war operations and of the army belongs to the wazir. The rank of the pen, as far as it is concerned with bookkeeping and official correspondence, goes to the person who knows these things well, even though it may be in the private possession of certain houses among followers of the dynasty. Sometimes, the office is kept in the same family, sometimes it is shared with others. They have a separate rank for the office, whose function it is to guard the ruler's door and to protect the ruler himself from the common people. The person who holds that office is called by them Mizwar, 476, that is, commandant of the elite troops, Jindar, who are employed at the court of the ruler and responsible for executing his orders, enforcing the punishments he metes out, executing the severe measures he takes, and guarding the inmates of his prisons. Their chief, the Mixwar, has charge of the court. He has to see to it that people behave properly in the reception hall where the common people are received. His office is something like a minor wazirate. The dynasty of the Abd al-Wadids shows no trace of any of these titles, nor does it have separate government functions, because of its Bedouin character and insufficient power. The Abd al-Wadids occasionally use the name doorkeeper, hajib, for the person in charge of the ruler's personal household affairs, as was also the case in the Hafsid dynasty. He is given combined charge of bookkeeping and official documents, as also was the case among the Hafsids. The reason for this is that the Abd al-Wadids simply followed the tradition of the dynasty to which they had been subservient and whose propaganda they had been supporting when they started their career. Present-day Spaniards call the person in charge of bookkeeping and of the ruler's activities and of all the other financial matters, wakil, manager. The wazir, there, has the same duties as the wazir usually has, but he is also in charge of official correspondence. The ruler, himself, puts his signature to all documents. Thus, the Spaniards do not have a separate office of signer of documents, alama, as other dynasties have. In the Turkish dynasty in Egypt, the name of doorkeeper, hajib, is used for persons of authority, hakim, among the men who hold power, that is, the Turks. These persons have to enforce the law among the people in the town. There are numerous hajibs. The office of hajib, among the Turks, is lower than that of Naib, which has general jurisdiction over both the ruling class and the common people. The Naib has the authority to appoint and remove certain officials at the proper times. He may grant and fix small salaries. His orders and decrees are executed as those of the ruler. He is the ruler's delegate in every respect. The doorkeepers, hajib, on the other hand, have jurisdiction over the various classes of common people and over the soldiers only when a complaint, against them, is lodged with them. They can use force against those who do not want to submit to their judgment. They rank below the Naib. In the Turkish dynasty, the wazir is the person in charge of collecting all the different kinds of taxes, the land tax, customs duties, and the poll tax. He also is in charge of the disposition of the tax revenue for government expenditures and the fixed stipends for soldiers and government employees. In addition, he can appoint or remove all officials, whatever their rank and description, who are concerned with tax collection and disbursement. 477 It is a custom of the Turks that the wazir be appointed from among the Copts in charge of the office of bookkeeping and tax collection, because in Egypt they have been familiar with these matters since ancient times. Occasionally, the ruler appoints to that office a member of the ruling group, one of the Turkish grandees or one of their descendants, as occasion may arise. God administers and governs all affairs in His wisdom. There is no God but Him. The Ministry, Diwan, of Financial Operations and Taxation. The Ministry of Taxation is an office that is necessary to the royal authority. It is concerned with tax operations. It guards the rights of the dynasty in the matters of income and expenditures. It takes a census of the names of all soldiers, fixes their salaries, and pays out their allowances at the proper times. In this connection recourse is had to rules set up by the chiefs of tax operations and the stewards of the dynasty. They are all written down in a book which gives all the details concerning income and expenditures. It is based upon a good deal of accounting, which is mastered only by those who have considerable skill in tax operations. The book is called the Diwan. At the same time, the word Diwan designates the place where the officials who are concerned with these matters have their offices. The name is said to have had the following origin. One day, Khosrov looked at the secretaries in his ministry, Diwan. They were all engaged in their separate calculations, and it looked as if they were talking to themselves. The king exclaimed, Diwana, which is Persian for crazy. 478 As a result, the place where they were working was called by that name. The ending, a was dropped, because the word was so much used, and dropping the a made it easier to pronounce. The word thus became Diwan. Later, it came to signify the tax book which contained the rules and computations. Another story is that Diwan is the Persian name for the devils. The secretaries were called devils because of their quick comprehension, their understanding of both the obvious and the difficult, and their ability to combine random and disparate facts. The name was then extended to designate the offices where they worked. In this sense, the name Diwan was taken over by the secretaries in charge of official correspondence and used to designate the place where their offices were located in the ruler's court, as will be mentioned later on. 479. One person is in charge of this office. He supervises all the operations of this kind. Each branch has its own supervisor. In some dynasties, supervision of the army, of military fiefs, of keeping count of allowances, and of other such things, is constituted as separate offices. Whether this is done or not, depends on the organization of a given dynasty and the arrangements made by its first rulers. It should be known that the office of tax collections, originates in dynasties only when their power and superiority and their interest in the different aspects of royal authority and in the ways of efficient administration have become firmly established. The first to set up the Diwan in the Muslim dynasty was Umar 480. The reason is said to have been the arrival of Abu Hurairah with money from Al-Bahrain. The Muslims thought that it was a very large sum, and they had trouble with its distribution. They tried to count the money and to establish how it should be paid out for allowances and claims. On that occasion, Khalid b. al-Walid advised the use of the Diwan. He said, "I have seen the rulers of Syria keeping a Diwan." Umar accepted the idea from Khalid. It has also been said that the person who advised Umar to introduce the Diwan was al-Hurmuzan 481. He noticed that military missions were dispatched without a Diwan, a muster roll. He asked Umar, who would know if some of the soldiers disappeared. Those who remained behind might leave their places and abscond with the money that had been given to them for their services, if they could assume that their desertion would not be noticed. Such things should be noted down exactly in a book. Therefore, establish a didn for them. Umar asked what the word didn meant, and it was explained to him. When he agreed to have a didn, he ordered Akil b. Abi Talib, 482 Makramah b. Naval, 483 and Jubair b. Mut'im, 484, all of them secretaries of the Quraysh, to write down the Diwan of the Muslim army. The Diwan was arranged according to family relationships and began with the relatives of the Prophet and continued according to the degree of relationship. This was the beginning of the ministry, Diwan, of the army. Az-Zuhri 485 reported on the authority of Said b. Al-Musayyib 486 that this took place in Al-Mubaram of the year 20 December, 640/January, 641. After the advent of Islam, the ministry, Diwan, of the land tax and tax collections remained as it had been. The 487, Diwan, of the Iraq used Persian, and that of Syria Byzantine Greek. The secretaries of the Diwans were Muslim subjects of the two groups. Then, with the appearance of Abd al-Malik b. Marwan, the form of the state became that of royal authority. People turned from the low standard of desert life to the splendor of sedentary culture and from the simplicity of illiteracy to the sophistication of literacy. Experts in writing and bookkeeping made their appearance among the Arabs and their clients. Thus, Abd al-Malik ordered Sulayman b. Sad, then governor of the Jordan province, to introduce the use of Arabic in the Diwan of Syria. Sulayman completed the task in exactly 1 year to the day. Saritan, 488 Abd al-Malik's secretary, looked at the situation, and said to the Byzantine secretaries, "Seek you a living in another craft, because God has taken this one from you." Al-Hajjaj ordered his secretary Salah b. Abd ar-Rahman to introduce the use of Arabic, instead of Persian, in the Diwan of the Iraq. Salah knew how to write both Arabic and Persian. He had learned it from Sadin Farfiq, his predecessor as secretary to Al-Hajjaj. When Sadin was killed in the war against Abd ar-Rahman b. al-Ashith, 489, Al-Hajjaj appointed Salah as his successor. Salah now carried out Al-Hajjaj's order and introduced the use of Arabic in the Diwan. He succeeded in doing that and in overcoming the reluctance of the Persian secretaries. Abd al-Hamid b. Yahya 490 used to say, Salah was an excellent man. He was a great boon to the secretaries. Later on, in the Abbasid dynasty, the office was added to the duties of the wazir, who supervised the man in charge of it. This was the case under the Barmecides and the Banu Sal b. Nabakht and other Abbasid wazirs. Certain religious laws attach to the office. They concern the army, the income and expenditures of the treasury, and it is the differing tax situations of the different regions, which depend on whether they had surrendered, peacefully, to the Muslim conquerors or had been conquered by force. Then, there is the question as to who makes appointment to the office. There are also the conditions governing the person in charge and the secretaries, as well as the rules according to which the accounts are to be kept. All these legal problems belong to the books on administration, Al-Aim as-Sultaniyat, and are written down in them. It is not the purpose of this book to deal with them. We discuss the subject only as it has to do with the nature of royal authority, in the discussion of which we are presently engaged. This office constitutes a large part of all royal authority. In fact, it is the third of its basic pillars. Royal authority requires soldiers, money, and the means to communicate with those who are absent. The ruler, therefore, needs persons to help him in the matters concerned with the sword, the pen, and finances. Thus, the person who holds the office of tax collections has a good part of the royal authority for himself. This was the case under the Umayyad dynasty in Spain and under its successors, the Reyes de Taifas. In the Almohad dynasty, the man in charge of the office was an almohad. He had complete freedom to levy, collect, and handle money, to control the activities of officials and agents in this connection, and then to make disbursements in the proper amounts and at the proper times. He was known as Sahib al-Ashghal, financial affairs manager. Occasionally, in some places, the office was held by persons who had a good understanding of it, but were not almohads. 491. The Hafsids gained control over Ifriqiya at the time when the exodus from Spain took place. Exiled, Spanish, notables came to the Hafsids. 492 among them, there were some who had been employed in this type of work in Spain, such as the Banu Said, 493 the lords of Alcala near Granada, who were known as the Banu Abil Hussein. The Hafsids liked to have them for this type of work. They entrusted them with the supervision of tax affairs, which was what they had been doing in Spain. They employed them and the almohads alternately for this purpose. Later on, the accountants and secretaries took the office over for themselves, and the almohads lost it. As the position of doorkeeper, hajib, became more and more important, and as his executive power came to extend over all government affairs, the institution of the Sahib al-Ashghal ceased to be influential. 494 The person in charge of it was dominated by the doorkeeper, hajib, and became, no more than, a mere tax collector. He lost the authority he had formerly had in the dynasty. In the contemporary Marinid dynasty, the accounting of the land tax and military allowances is in the hands of one man. He audits all accounts. Recourse is had to his diwan, and his authority is second, only, to the authority of the ruler or wazir. His signature attests to the correctness of the accounts dealing with the land tax and military allowances. These are the principal governmental ranks and functions. They are high ranks, involving the exercise of general authority and requiring direct contact with the ruler. In the Turkish dynasty, the functions, under discussion, are divided. The person in charge of the Diwan of military allowances is known as Inspector of the Army, Nazir al-Jaysh. The person in charge of finances is called the Wazir. He has supervision over the dynasty's Diwan of general tax collection. This is the highest rank among the men who are in charge of financial matters. Among the Turks, supervision of financial matters is spread over many ranks, because the dynasty rules a large territory, and exercises great powers, and its finances and taxes are too vast to be handled by one man all by himself, however competent. Therefore, for the general supervision of financial affairs, the man known as Wazir is appointed. In spite of his important position, he is second to one of the clients of the ruler who shares in the ruler's group feeling and belongs to the military caste, and who is called Ustad Dar. 495 This official outranks the Wazir, who does all he can to do his bidding. He is one of the great emirs of the dynasty and belongs to the army and the military caste. Other functions are subordinate to that of the Wazir. Among the Turks. All of them have reference to financial matters and bookkeeping, and are restricted in their authority to particular matters. There is, for instance, the inspector of the privy purse, Nazir al-Kas, that is, the person who handles the ruler's private finances, such as concern his fiefs or his shares in the land tax and taxable lands that are not part of the general Muslim fist. 496. He is under the control of the Emir. The Ustad Dar, but if the Wazir is an army man, the Ustad Dar has no authority over him. The inspector of the privy purse also is under the control of the treasurer of the finances of the ruler, one of the latter's Mamluks, who is called Hazandar, treasurer, because his office is concerned with the private property of the ruler. Such is the nomenclature 497 used in connection with the function of financial administration in the Turkish dynasty in the East. We have mentioned how it was handled in the Maghrib. God governs all affairs. There is no lord except him. The ministry, diwan, of official correspondence and writing. This office is not required by the nature of royal authority. Many dynasties were able to dispense with it completely, as, for example, the dynasties rooted in the desert and which were not affected by the refinements of sedentary culture and high development of the crafts. In the Muslim dynasty, the Arabic language situation and the custom of expressing what one wanted to express in good form intensified the need for the office. Thus, writing came to convey, as a rule, the essence of a matter in better stylistic form than was possible in oral expression. The secretary to an Arab emir was customarily a relative and one of the great of his tribe. This was the case with the caliphs and leading personalities among the men around Muhammad in Syria and the Iraq, because of the great reliability and genuine discretion of relatives and tribesmen. When the language became corrupt and a craft that had to be learned, 498, the office was entrusted to those who knew Arabic well. Under the Abbasids, it was a high office. The secretary issued documents freely, and signed his own name to them at the end. He sealed them with the seal of the ruler, which was a signet upon which the name of the ruler or his emblem was engraved. It was impressed on a red clay mixed with water and called sealing clay. The document was folded and glued, and then both sides was sealed with the seal. Later on, the documents were issued in the name of the ruler, and the secretary merely affixed his signature, alama, 499 to them at the beginning or end. He could choose where he wanted to put it as well as its wording. The office then lost standing through the fact that officials of other government ranks gained in the ruler's esteem or because the wazir gained control over the ruler. The signature of a secretary became ineffective, as a sign of authority, and was replaced by the signature of his superior, and this was now considered decisive. The secretary affixed his official signature, but the signature of his superior made the document valid. This happened in the later years of the Hafsid dynasty, when the office of doorkeeper, Hajib, gained in esteem and the doorkeeper became the delegate of the ruler and then came to control him. The signature of the secretary became ineffective, as a sign of authority, but was still affixed to documents, in acknowledgement of its former importance. The doorkeeper, Hajib, made it the rule for the secretary to sign letters of his by affixing a handwritten note, for which he 500 could choose any formula of ratification he wished. The secretary obeyed him and affixed the usual mark. So long as the ruler was in control of his own affairs, he saw to the matter himself, and made it the rule for the secretary to affix the signature. One of the functions of the secretary's office is the talkie. It means that the secretary sits in front of the ruler during his public audiences and notes down, yawakti, in the most concise and stylistically most perfect manner, the decisions he receives from the ruler concerning the petitions presented to him. These decisions are then issued as they are, or they are copied in a document which must be in the possession of the petitioner. The person who formulates a talkie needs a great deal of stylistic skill, so that the talkie has the correct form. Gafar B. Yahya used to write talkies on petitions for Rashid and to hand the petition, with the talkie, back to the petitioner. Stylists vied with each other to obtain his talkies, in order to learn the different devices and kinds of good style from them. It has even been said that such petitions, with Ghafar's talkie on them, were sold for a dinar 501. Things were handled in this manner in various dynasties. It should be known that the person in charge of this function must be selected from among the upper classes and be a refined gentleman of great knowledge and with a good deal of stylistic ability. He will have to concern himself with the principal branches of scholarship, because such things may come up in the gatherings and audiences of the ruler. In addition, to be a companion of kings calls for good manners and the possession of good qualities of character. And he must know all the secrets of good style, to be able to write letters and find the words that conform to the meaning intended. In some dynasties, the rank of secretary is entrusted to military men, since some dynasties, by their very nature, have no regard for scholarship, on account of the simplicity of group feeling prevailing in them. The ruler gives his government offices and ranks to men who share in his group feeling. Appointments to the financial administration, to the sword, and to the office of secretary, are made from among them. The sword requires no learning. But the financial administration and the secretaryship need it, for the latter requires a good style and the former requires accounting skill. Therefore, rulers select people from the learned class for the office of secretary, when there is need for it, and entrust it to them. However, the secretary is subordinate to the higher authority exercised by the men who share in the ruler's group feeling, and his authority derives from that of his superior. This is the case with the Turkish dynasty in the East at this time. The office of chief secretary belongs to the Secretary of State, Sahib Alanshah. However, the Secretary of State is under the control of an emir from among the men who share in the group feeling of the ruler. This man is known as the Da'idar 502. The ruler usually relies upon him, trusts him, and confides in him, whereas he relies upon the secretary, for matters that have to do with good style and the conformity of the expression to what one wants to express. 503 and other related matters. The ruler who selects and picks a secretary from the rank and file has many conditions to consider. These conditions governing the secretary are best and most completely presented in the epistle that the Secretary Abd al-Hamid addressed to his fellow secretaries. It runs as follows: 504. And now, may God guard you who practice the craft of secretaryship, and may He keep you and give you success and guidance. There are prophets and messengers and highly honored kings. After them come different kinds of men, all of them made by God. They are of different kinds, even if they are all alike in fact. God occupied them with different kinds of crafts and various sorts of businesses, so that they might be able to make a living and earn their sustenance. He gave to you, assembled secretaries, the great opportunity to be men of education and gentlemen, to have knowledge and good judgment. 505. You bring out whatever is good in the caliphate and straighten out its affairs. Through your advice, God improves the government for the benefit of human beings and makes their countries civilized. The ruler cannot dispense with you. You alone make him a competent ruler. Your position with regard to rulers is that you are the ears through which they hear, the eyes through which they see, the tongues through which they speak, and the hands through which they touch. May God give you, therefore, enjoyment of the excellent craft with which He has distinguished you, and may He not deprive you of the great favors that He has shown unto you. No craftsman needs more than you to combine all praiseworthy good traits and all memorable and highly regarded excellent qualities, O secretaries, if you aspire to fit the description given of you in this letter. The secretary needs on his own account, and his master, who trusts him with his important affairs, expects him to be mild where mildness is needed, to be understanding where judgment is needed, to be enterprising where enterprise is needed, to be hesitant where hesitation is needed. He must prefer modesty, justice, and fairness. He must keep secrets. He must be faithful in difficult circumstances. He must know, beforehand, about the calamities that may come. He must be able to put things in their proper places and misfortunes into their proper categories. He must have studied every branch of learning and know it well, and if he does not know it well, he must at least have acquired an adequate amount of it. By virtue of his natural intelligence, good education, and outstanding experience, he must know what is going to happen to him before it happens, and he must know the result of his actions before action starts. He must make the proper preparations for everything, and he must set up everything in its proper, customary form. Therefore, assembled secretaries, vie with each other to acquire the different kinds of education and to gain an understanding of religious matters. Start with knowledge of the Book of God and religious duties. Then, study the Arabic language, as that will give you a cultivated form of speech. Then, learn to write well, as that will be an ornament to your letters. Transmit poetry and acquaint yourselves with the rare expressions and ideas that poems contain. Acquaint yourselves also with both Arab and non-Arab political events, and with the tales of both groups, and the biographies describing them, as that will be helpful to you in your endeavors. Do not neglect to study accounting, for it is the mainstay of the land tax register. 506 Detest prejudices with all your heart, lofty ones as well as low ones, and all idle and contemptible things, for they bring humility and are the ruin of secretaryship. Do not let your craft be a low one. Guard against backbiting and calumny and the actions of stupid people. Beware of haughtiness, foolishness, and pride, for they mean acquiring hostility without, even the excuse of, hatred. Love each other in God in your craft. Advise your colleagues to practice it in a way befitting your virtuous, fair, and gifted predecessors. If times go hard for one of you, be kind to him and console him, until everything be well with him again. Should old age make one of you unable to get around and pursue his livelihood and meet his friends, visit him and honor him and consult him, and profit from his outstanding experience and mature knowledge. Every one of you should be more concerned for his assistants, who may be useful when needed, than for his own children or brothers. Should some praise come to one of you, in the course of his work, he should ascribe the merit to his colleague, any blame he should bear all by himself. He should beware of mistakes and slips and of being annoyed when conditions change. For you, assembled secretaries, are more prompt to be blamed than current readers, 507 and blame is more detrimental to you than to them. You know that every one of you has a master, one who gives from his own as much as can be expected, and, every one of you, has the obligation to repay him, since he deserves it, with fidelity, gratefulness, tolerance, patience, good counsel, discretion, and active interest in his affairs. And to show his good intentions by his actions whenever his master needs him and his resources. Be conscious of your obligations. God give you success, in good and bad circumstances, in privation as in munificence and kindness, in happiness as in misfortune. Any member of this noble craft who has all these qualities has good qualities indeed. If any one of you be appointed to an office, or if some matter that concerns God's children be turned over to one of you, he should think of God and choose obedience to him. He should be kind to the weak and fair to those who have been wronged. All creatures are God's children. He loves most those who are kindest to his children. Furthermore, he should judge with justice, he should honor the noble, descendants of Muhammad, augment the booty, gained in wars against infidels, and bring civilization to the country. He should be friendly to the subjects, and refrain from harming them. He should be humble and mild in his office. He should be kind in handling the land tax registers 508 and in calling in outstanding claims. You should explore the character of him with whom you associate. When his good and bad sides are known, you will be able to help him to do the good things that agree with him, and be able to contrive to keep him from the bad things he desires. You must be able to do that in the subtlest and best manner. You know that a person who is in charge of an animal and understands his job, endeavors to know the character of the animal. If it is inclined to gallop, 509 he does not goad it when he is riding it. If it is inclined to kick, he takes precautions with its forelegs. If he fears that it will shy, he takes precautions with its head. If it is restive, he gently subdues its desire to go where it wants to go. If it still continues, he pulls it slightly to the side, then has its halter loosened. This description of how to take care of an animal contains good points for those who want to lead human beings and deal with them, serve them, and have intimate contact with them. The secretary, with his excellent education, his noble craft, his subtlety, his frequent dealings with people who confer with him and discuss things with him and learn from him or fear his severity, needs to be kind to his associates, 509a to flatter them, and to supply their wants. Even more than the person in charge of an animal which cannot answer, does not know what is right, does not understand what is said to it, and goes only where its master who rides upon it makes it go. Be kind, God show mercy unto you when you look after things. Use as much reflection and thought as possible. God permitting, you will thus escape harshness, annoyance, and rudeness on the part of your associates. They will be in agreement with you, and you will have their friendship and protection, if God wills. None of you should have too sumptuous an office or go beyond the proper limits in his dress, his mount, his food, his drink, his house, his servants, or in the other things pertaining to his station, for, despite the nobility of the craft by which God has distinguished you, you are servants who are not permitted to fall short in their service. You are caretakers whom one does not permit to be wasteful or spendthrift. Try to preserve your modesty by planned moderation in all the things I have mentioned and told you. Beware of the wastefulness of prodigality and the bad results of luxury. They engender poverty and bring about humiliation. People who are prodigal and live in luxury are put to shame, especially if they be secretaries and men of education. Things repeat themselves. One thing contains the clue to another. Let yourselves be guided in your future undertakings by your previous experience. Then, choose the method of doing things that is most definite, most accurate, and that promises the best result. You should know that there is something that defeats accomplishment, namely, talking about things. The person who does it is prevented from using his knowledge and his ability to think. Therefore, every one of you, while he is in his office, should endeavor to talk no more than is sufficient, he should be concise in the matters he brings up and in the answers he gives, and he should give thought to all the arguments he advances. His work will profit from that. It will prevent too much preoccupation with other things. He should implore God to grant him success and to support him with his guidance, for he must fear making mistakes that might hurt his body and cast doubt upon his intelligence and education. When any one of you says or thinks that the high quality and efficiency of his work is obviously the result of his own cleverness and knowledge of how to do things, he provokes God. God will let him depend upon himself alone, and then he will find that he is not adequate to his task. This is no secret to those who reflect. None of you should say that he has a better understanding of affairs, or knows better how to handle difficult matters, than other members of his craft, than those who serve together with him. Of two persons, discerning people consider him the more intelligent who throws off conceit and thinks his colleagues more intelligent and more skillful than he. But at any rate, both parties should acknowledge the excellence of God's favors. No one should let himself be deceived by his own opinions and consider himself free from mistakes. Nor should he strive to outdo his friends, equals, colleagues, or his family. Everybody must give praise to God, in humility in the face of his greatness, in meekness in the face of his might, and in fulfillment of the command to speak of God's favors 5:10. In this letter of mine, let me refer to the old proverb, he who accepts good advice 511 all is successful. This is the essence of this letter and the best that is said in it, after the references to God it contains. Therefore, I have placed it at the end, and I close the letter with it. May God take care of us and of you, assembled students and secretaries, in the same way he takes care of those whom, as he knows in his prescience, he will make happy and guide aright. He can do it. It is in his hand. Farewell, and God's mercy and blessings upon you. The Police 512. In Ifriqiyat, the holder, of the office of Chief of Police, is at this time called the magistrate, Hakim. In Spain, he is called the town chief, Sahib al-Madinah. In the Turkish dynasty, in Egypt, he is called the governor, Wali. It is an office that is subordinate to the person in charge of the sword in the dynasty, who at times uses the chief of police to execute his orders. The office of chief of police was originally created by the Abbasid dynasty. The person who held it had a twofold duty. He had, firstly, to concern himself with crimes in the investigating stage, and, secondly, to execute the legal punishments. The religious law cannot concern itself with suspicions of possible criminal acts. It can concern itself only with executing the legal punishments. Political leadership, on the other hand, has to concern itself with the investigating stage, in which is ascertained the commission of crimes, necessitating legal punishments. It does this through the magistrate, who, being in the possession of all the circumstantial evidence, forces the criminal to confess, as is required by the general public interest. The person in charge of the investigating stage and of executing afterwards the legal punishments do, when the judge has no longer anything to do with the case, was called chief of police. Occasionally, he was given sole jurisdiction over capital crimes and legal punishments. And those matters were taken away from the judge's jurisdiction. This rank was considered one of great reputation, and was entrusted to high military leaders and important clients of the court entourage. It implied no general executive power over all classes, its jurisdiction extending only over low and suspect elements and, involving, the restraining of turbulent and criminal people. Among the Spanish Umayyads, the office of Chief of Police acquired great celebrity. It was divided into a great police and a small police. The jurisdiction of the great police was made to extend over both the upper and the lower classes. It had jurisdiction over government dignitaries, and, in cases of wrongdoing, could restrain them, their relatives, and other persons of rank who were connected with them as clients. The chief of the small police was concerned only with the common people. The chief of the great police had his seat at the gate of the palace of the ruler. He had footmen, Rajai, who occupied places near him, 513 which they did not leave except to go about his business. The office was entrusted only to great personalities of the dynasty. It even became a stepping stone to the wazirate and to the office of doorkeeper, Hajib. In the Almohad dynasty in the Maghrib, the office enjoyed a certain reputation, even though it did not have general jurisdiction. It was entrusted only to important Almohad personalities. It did not have authority over government dignitaries. Nowadays, its importance has greatly decreased. It no longer is the preserve of Almohad personalities, and may be entrusted to any follower of the dynasty, who is able to take charge of it. In the Marinid dynasty at this time in the West, the office is vested in the houses of Marinid clients and followers. In the Turkish dynasty in the East, the office is entrusted to Turkish personalities or to descendants of the people of the preceding Kurdish dynasty. Incumbents are chosen for the office in both regions 514 according to the energy and resolution they show in enforcing the law. The purpose is to cut down corruption, to stamp out criminality, to destroy and dissolve the homes and centers of criminal activity, and to enforce the punishments imposed by the religious law and by the political authorities, as concern for the general, public, interests in a town requires. God causes the change of night and day 515. The Admiralty. The Admiralty is one of the ranks and functions of the dynasty in the realm of the Maghrib and Ifriqiyat. It is subordinate to the person in charge of the sword and comes under his authority in many respects. In customary usage, the person in charge of the admiralty is called al-Maland, 516 with an emphatic al. The word is derived from the language of the European Christians. It is the technical term for the office in their language. The rank of admiral is restricted to the realm of Afriqiya and the Maghrib, because both Afriqiya and the Maghrib are on the southern shore of the Mediterranean. Along its southern shore the lands of the Berbers extend from Ceuta to Alexandria and on to Syria. Along its northern shore are the countries of Spain and of the European Christians, Franks, the Slavs, and the Byzantines, also extending to Syria. It is called the Byzantine Sea or the Syrian Sea, 517 according to the people who inhabit its shores. Those who live along the coast and on the shores of both sides of the Mediterranean are more concerned with maritime conditions than any other maritime nation. The Byzantines, the European Christians, and the Goths lived on the northern shore of the Mediterranean. Most of their wars and most of their commerce was by sea. They were skilled in navigating the Mediterranean, and in naval war. When these people coveted the possession of the southern shore, as the Byzantines coveted Afriqiya and as the Goths coveted the Maghrib, they crossed over in their fleets and took possession of it. Thus, they achieved superiority over the Berbers and deprived them of their power. They had populous cities there, such as Carthage, Spitla, Jalula, 518 Mernach, 519 Churchill, and Tangier. The ancient master of Carthage used to fight the master of Rome and to send fleets loaded with armies and equipment to wage war against him. Thus, seafaring is a custom of the inhabitants of both shores of the Mediterranean, which was known in ancient as in modern times. When the Muslims took possession of Egypt, Omar b. al-Khattab wrote to Amr b. al-As and asked him to describe the sea to him. Amr replied, "The sea is a great creature upon which weak creatures ride, like worms upon a piece of wood." 520 Thus, he recommended at that time that the Muslims be kept away from seafaring. No Arab travelled by sea save those who did so without Omar's knowledge and were punished by him for it. Omar thus punished Arfaha b. Hard Hama al-Azdi, the chief of the Bajil of 521. He sent him on a raid against Oman, and he learned, later, that he had raided it by sea. 522 He disapproved of his having made the raid by sea, and told him so in no uncertain terms. Thus it remained until Muawiyah's reign. He permitted the Muslims to go by sea and to wage the holy war in ships. The reason for this was that on account of their Bedouin attitude, the Arabs were at first not skilled in navigation and seafaring, whereas the Byzantines and the European Christians, on account of their experience of the sea and the fact that they had grown up traveling in ships, were used to the sea and well trained in navigation. The royal and governmental authority of the Arabs became firmly established and powerful at that time. The non-Arab nations became servants of the Arabs and were under their control. Every craftsman offered them his best services. They employed seagoing nations for their maritime needs. Their own experience of the sea and of navigation grew, and they turned out to be very expert. They wished to wage the holy war by sea. They constructed ships and galleys and loaded the fleet with men and weapons. They embarked the army and fighters to fight against the unbelievers across the sea. This was the special concern of the provinces and border regions closest to the shores of the Mediterranean, such as Syria, Afriqiya, the Maghrib, and Spain. The Caliph Abdul Malik recommended to Hassan b. an-Nu'man, 523 the governor of Afriqiya, that a shipyard 524 be set up in Tunis for the production of maritime implements, as he was desirous of waging the holy war. From there, the conquest of Sicily was achieved in the days of Ziyadat al-Ibn Ibrahim b. al-Aklab under the leadership of the chief mufti, Asad b. al-Furat 525. Pantelleria 526 also was conquered in his day. Muawiyah b. Iudaoi 527 had been sent on a raid against Sicily in the days of Muawiyah b. Abi Sufyan, but God had not enabled him to conquer it. It was conquered by the Aqlabid ruler and his general, Asad b. al-Furat. Thereafter, under the Ubaydid, Fatimids, and the Spanish Umayyads, the fleets of Afriqiya and Spain constantly attacked each other's countries in civil war operations, and they thoroughly devastated the coastal regions. In the days of Abd ar-Rahman and Nasir, the Spanish fleet had grown to about 200 vessels, and the African fleet to the same number, or close to it. The fleet admiral in Spain was Ibn Rumayz. The port used by the Spanish fleet for docking and hoisting sail was Pechina and Almeria. The fleet was assembled from all the provinces. Each region where ships were used contributed one fleet unit, under the supervision of a commander in charge of everything connected with fighting, weapons and combatants alike. There also was a captain who directed the movement of the fleet, using either the wind or oars. He also directed its anchoring in port. When the whole fleet was assembled for a large-scale raid or for important government business, it was manned in its home port. The ruler loaded it with men, drawn from his best troops and clients, and placed them under the supervision of one commander, who belonged to the highest class of the people of his realm and to whom all were responsible. He then sent them off, and awaited their victorious return with booty. During the time of the Muslim dynasty, the Muslims gained control over the whole Mediterranean. Their power and domination over it was vast. The Christian nations could do nothing against the Muslim fleets, anywhere in the Mediterranean. All the time, the Muslims rode its wave for conquest. There occurred then many well-known episodes of conquest and plunder. The Muslims took possession of all the islands that lie off its shores, such as Majorca, Minorca, Ibiza, Sardinia, Sicily, Pantelleria, Malta, Crete, Cyprus, and of all the other provinces of the Byzantines and the European Christians, on its shores. Abu I, Qasim ash-Shi'i 528 and his descendants sent their fleets on raids against the island of Genoa from Al-Madtiyah. They returned victorious with booty. Mujahid al-Amri, the master of Dinaya, one of the Reyes de Taifas, conquered the island of Sardinia with his fleet in the year 405 1014/15 529. The Christians reconquered it in due course. During all that time, the Muslims were gaining control over the largest part of the High Sea. Their fleets kept coming and going, and the Muslim armies crossed the sea in ships from Sicily to the great mainland opposite Sicily, on the northern shore. They fell upon the European Christian rulers and made massacres in their realms. This happened in the days of the Banu Abul Hussein, 530. The rulers of Sicily, who supported the Ubaydid, Fatimid, propaganda there. The Christian nations withdrew with their fleets to the northeastern side of the Mediterranean, to the coastal regions inhabited by the European Christians and the Slavs, and to the Aegean Islands, 531, and did not go beyond them. The Muslim fleet had pounced upon them as eagerly as lions upon their prey. They covered most of the surface of the Mediterranean with their equipment and numbers and traveled its lanes, on missions both peaceful and warlike. Not a single Christian board floated on it. Eventually, however, the Ubaydid, Fatimid, and Umayyad dynasties weakened and softened and were affected by infirmity. Then, the Christians reached out for the eastern islands of the Mediterranean, such as Sicily, Crete, and Malta, and took possession of them. They pressed on against the shores of Syria during this interval, and took possession of Tripoli, Ascalon, Tyre, and Akko. They gained control over all the seaports of Syria. They conquered Jerusalem and built there a church as an outward manifestation of their religion and worship. They deprived the Banu Hezron of Tripolitania 532 and, they conquered, Gabes and Sfax, and imposed a poll tax upon their inhabitants. Then they took possession of Al-Madtiyah, the original seat of the Ubaydid, Fatimids, and took it away from the descendants of Bulijtun b. Zert. In the 5th–11th century, they had the lead in the Mediterranean. In Egypt and Syria, interest in the fleet weakened and eventually ceased to exist. Since then, they have shown no concern for the naval matters with which they had been so exceedingly concerned under the Ubaydid, Fatimid, dynasty, as is known from Ubaydid, Fatimid, history. In consequence, the identity of the office of the Admiralty was lost in those countries. It remained in Afriqiya and the Maghrib, but only there. At the present time, the Western Mediterranean has large fleets and is very powerful. No enemy has trespassed on it or been able to do anything there. In Lamtuna, Almoravid, times, the admirals of the fleet in the west were the Banu Maymun, chieftains from the peninsula of Cadiz, 533, which they, later on, handed over to the Almohad, Abd al-Mumin, to whom they paid obedience. Their fleets, assembled from the countries on both shores, reached the number of 100. In the 6th–12th century, the Almohad dynasty flourished and had possession of both shores. The Almohads organized their fleet in the most perfect manner ever known and on the largest scale ever observed. Their admiral was Ahmad as-Saikili, who belonged to the Sajhiyan, a branch of the Sadwikish, 534, who lived on the island of Jerba. The Christians had captured him there, and he had grown up among them. The ruler of Sicily, Roger II, selected him for his service and employed him in it, but he died and was succeeded by his son, whose anger, Ahmed, somehow aroused. He feared for his life and went to Tunis, where he stayed with the chief of Tunis, one of the Banu Abd al-Mumin. He went on to Marrakesh, and was received there by the Caliph Yusuf al-Ashrite b. Abd al-Mumin. 535 with great kindness and honor. The Caliph gave him many presents and entrusted him with command of his fleet. As commander of the fleet, he went to wage the holy war against the Christian nations. He did noteworthy and memorable deeds during the Almohad dynasty. In his period, the Muslim fleet was of a size and quality never, to our knowledge, attained before or since. When Salah ad-Din Yusuf b. Ayyub, the ruler of Egypt and Syria at this time, set out to recover the border cities, ports, of Syria from the Christian nations and to cleanse Jerusalem of the abomination of unbelief and to rebuild it, one fleet of unbelievers after another came to the relief of the border cities, ports. From all the regions near Jerusalem which they controlled. They supported them with equipment and food. The fleet of Alexandria could not stand up against them. The Christians had had the upper hand in the eastern Mediterranean for so long, and they had numerous fleets there. The Muslims, on the other hand, had for a long time been too weak to offer them any resistance there, as we have mentioned. In this situation, Salah ad-Din sent Abd al-Karim b. Munkid, a member of the family of the Banu Munkid, the rulers of Shazar, as his ambassador to Yaqub al-Mansur, the Almohad ruler of the Maghrib at that time. 536 Salahaddin had taken Shazar away from the Banu Munkid but had spared them to use them in his government. Now, he sent Abd al-Karim, a member of that family, to the ruler of the Maghrib to ask for the support of his fleets, to prevent the fleets of the unbelievers from achieving their desire of bringing relief to the Christians in the Syrian border cities, ports. Abd al-Karim carried a letter from Salah ad-Din to that effect. The letter had been composed by al-Qadi, al-Fadil al-Bisani. 537. It began with these words: "May God open to our Lord the gates of success and good fortune." The letter is quoted by the Imad al-Isfahani in the Fath al-Qudsi. 538. Al-Mansur was greatly annoyed with the members of the embassy. 539. Because they did not address him as commander of the faithful, but he concealed his annoyance and treated them with great kindness and honor. He sent them back to Salah ad-Din, who had sent them, and did not comply with his request. This story is evidence for the facts that the ruler of the Maghrib alone possessed a fleet, that the Christians controlled the eastern Mediterranean, and that the dynasties in Egypt and Syria at that time and later were not interested in naval matters or in building up government fleets. Yaqub al-Mansur then died, and the Almohad dynasty became infirm. The Galician nation seized control of most of Spain. The Muslims took refuge in the coastal region and took possession of the islands of the western Mediterranean. They regained their former strength, and their power on the surface of the Mediterranean grew. Their fleets increased, and the strength of the Muslims became again equal to that of the Christians. This happened in the time of the Marinid Sultan, Abul Hassan, 540, the Zenata ruler in the Maghrib. When he desired to wage the holy war, his fleet was as well equipped and numerous as that of the Christians. Then, the naval strength of the Muslims declined once more, because of the weakness of the ruling dynasty. Maritime habits were forgotten under the impact of the strong Bedouin attitude prevailing in the Maghrib, and as the result of the discontinuance of Spanish habits. The Christians resumed their former, famous maritime training, and renewed their constant activity in the Mediterranean, and their experience with conditions there. They again showed their former superiority over others on the high seas of the Mediterranean, and in Mediterranean shipping. The Muslims came to be strangers to the Mediterranean. The only exceptions are a few inhabitants of the coastal regions, who are active on the sea. They ought to have many assistants and supporters, or they ought to have support from the dynasties to enable them to recruit help and to work toward the goal of increased seafaring activities. The rank of admiral has been preserved to this day in the dynasties of the Maghrib. There, the identity of the admiralty is still preserved, and how to take care of a fleet, how to build ships and navigate them, is known. Perhaps some political opportunity will arise in the coastal countries, and the Muslims will, once again, ask the wind to blow against unbelief and unbelievers. The inhabitants of the Maghrib have it on the authority of the books of predictions that the Muslims will yet have to make a successful attack against the Christians and conquer the lands of the European Christians beyond the sea. This, it is said, will take place by sea. God is the friend of the believers. 541.